Alan Wake 2 is a tale of two games. Its story follows two intertwined protagonists. First, Saga Anderson, an FBI agent who's investigating ritualistic murders in the small Washington town of Bright Falls, and then second, Alan Wake, a horror writer who has been missing from that same area for the past 13 years and who was trapped in an alternate dimension known as the Dark Place following the events of the original game. Unfortunately, the quality of these two narrative experiences ends up being vastly different, and it's ultimately this contrasting quality that does the most damage to the game. I want to be clear that this video is not a review of the game, but rather an in-depth analysis, if you couldn't tell from its length. The goal of this video is not to tell you if Alan Wake 2 is worth your money or time, but rather to examine what the game does well and what it doesn't. Because of this, know that the video is chock full of spoilers, and while I'll give a full spoiler warning before getting into the analysis, just know that some of the footage you'll be seeing on screen for the next several minutes is from mid-game locations. If you haven't played Alan Wake 2 yet and aren't sure if it's for you, then I cautiously recommend trying the game for yourself. If you're a fan of the survival horror genre, you will likely enjoy the game, and there are many parts of this game that deserve to be experienced unspoiled. As I stated up front, I found one half of the game's experience to be exceptional, and the other half the experience to just be fine. Alan Wake 2 is always authentically itself, but the problem here is that for every innovative or clever thing the game does, it is also repeating mistakes. Alan Wake 2 was developed by Remedy Entertainment and released in October of 2023, over 13 years after the original game. It has been received remarkably well by critics and fans alike, and this is something that I don't think should be understated. It's impressive that a sequel to a game that released 13 years ago has found such acclaim, given that the original, while well received at the time, has grown to be more of a cult classic rather than something mainstream. I attempted to play the first game at release, but it was too scary for me, and that's not a joke. It wouldn't be until much later that I would play through it in its entirety. While I wouldn't say I'm a big fan of horror games, I have played and enjoyed many of the modern classics in this genre, the Resident Evil remakes and Dead Space, for example. I also consider some horror-adjacent games such as Prey or The Last of Us to be some of the greatest games of all time. All of this is to say that even as a mostly passive observer to the horror genre, I can see that it has evolved quite a lot since the release of the original game, as has the video game medium as a whole. The first Alan Wake came out in 2010, and it shows. Alan Wake 2 is mostly successful at adapting to where the horror genre is today as opposed to where it was previously, and it's especially impressive the parts that manage this evolution because they do so while still largely maintaining the game's identity. Remedy as developers continue to push the envelope with how music and live action scenes are integrated into their games, and while I don't always agree on the quality or necessity of these additions, they are still unlike almost anything other developers are attempting. Alan Wake 2 has a scene involving music that, while a small moment, sticks with me as one of the most impactful moments from the game, and no, it isn't either of the parts you're thinking. In a lot of ways, it feels like Remedy's creative director Sam Lake has taken pages out of Hideo Kojima's playbook. If that name means nothing to you, Kojima is widely regarded as one of the industry's most innovative game designers, having created the Metal Gear series and 2019's Death Stranding. Both directors seem focused not just on making games, but making games that push forward what can be done with the video game medium, often attempting to tell complex stories in complex ways, which can have problems as you might imagine. I can't speak for the Metal Gear series, but both Death Stranding as well as the recent Remedy games have plots that are typically overly complex, focused on creating more questions than actually providing answers. Both developers also have a tendency to overindulge in their own brand. Both of these are what many people love about these developers, but also what many others hate. Remedy's previous game Control, for all intents and purposes, was my first experience with the studio, and just so you know, I've done an in-depth critique of that game as well. While this video is separate from that one, I would recommend watching that video on Control, as many of the arguments I made in it apply here as well. In that video, I discussed how the game's experience was centered on 4 core pillars: world building, combat, side content, and the story. However, not all of those areas received the same amount of attention. Control was chiefly designed around building the world, and because of that design decision, all other aspects of the game, the combat, the side content, and most importantly, the narrative, all fell short. These 4 pillars are relevant for the discussion in this video, as they are also the core design pillars of this game. Like Control before it, the primary focus of Alan Wake 2's experience is building the lore and world that these events are occurring in, and as I've stated, the game is incredibly successful in this regard. Additionally, the way Alan Wake 2 continues to build the Remedy-connected universe both overtly and covertly, connecting the studio's different franchises together, is enthralling to uncover. Using Marvel as an example, if Control was Iron Man, then Alan Wake 2 would be Captain America, containing some familiar faces, some names we recognize, and even a character who vanished for many years. The game manages to feel like just a small corner of a much larger universe while also still telling its own story. It's very much establishing the characters versus assembling them. These connections for me personally, and I'm sure many others, were a big part of why the world building was especially interesting. In regards to those other parts of the experience, however, the combat, the side content, and the story, it's unfortunately once again a mixed experience, but not in the same way it was with Control. This sentiment is echoed through the big 2 criticisms that Alan Wake 2 has been receiving. First, that the game doesn't have enough gameplay, i.e. it's a walking simulator, and second, that the narrative and to a lesser extent the characters are poorly written. Said another way, the first criticism boils down to combat and side content, whereas the second is about the story. I both agree and disagree with these criticisms, and that's not me trying to be cute, but rather goes back to what I said in the opening of this video. Alan Wake 2 is a tale of 2 games. The Saga Anderson side of the game, following her investigation and grounded in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, improves on almost every aspect of the Remedy game experience. I say almost there because it's not perfect, but the investigative mystery storyline is both well-paced and acted, the combat is mostly deliberate and intense, and the side content, while a step back in terms of variety, actually offers tangible rewards, something that was missing completely from Control. Now, on the other hand, we have the Alan Wake portion of the game, and it's this side of the experience that actually reminds me of a worse Control. It maintains the style, beautiful locations, and quite a lot of intrigue, but falls into traps the other half doesn't. It has frivolous combat, even worse collectibles, and a story that is ultimately meaningless. That last bit is the one that is most likely to make some people angry, because this type of story is often seen as uncriticizable by many people. Due to the nature of the game, it's either that you didn't understand what the game was trying to do, or that you're taking it too seriously and that parts of the game aren't supposed to make sense. The game is seemingly wrapped in 2 layers of protection that way, but also forgets that in the real world, that's a big no-no. I think many people are sweeping aside rather large problems with it just because of the mindfuck meta-narrative that Remedy has attempted to craft with it, which is fine. The point of this video is not to tell someone else what they should or shouldn't enjoy, but rather to explain the very real problems that this game has and to explore why it has these problems. This will be the spoiler warning, and I'm going to include both the original game as well as Control in this warning. For reference, I also discussed some parts of the narrative out of order, so just making that known. Additionally, about half of this video was made before the final draft New Game Plus came out, so I decided to keep my original thoughts and video intact and just add a New Game Plus section at the very end. So now you have to listen to all of my original thoughts that could be wrong or just misdirections in order to unlock the true ending to my video. Isn't that fun? This video can be a spiral too. Lastly, I want to clarify that while I do give a very brief explanation of the first game, this video does not include a complete story recap for that game, largely because Remedy themselves marketed the sequel as a standalone experience. This video also won't include a recap of Control or its Alan Wake related expansion either, as I talk quite a lot about that game and expansion in my previous video. The first game obviously sets up the basis for the plot and introduces some of the characters, but in a lot of ways it feels unnecessary. Again, even the developers here are saying the first game is optional. That's not just me saying it. If you are wanting a good video about that first game, I recommend checking out Monty Zander's video analysis on it, as it's incredibly thorough and is a great watch. I'll link it in the description below. And with that, down the rabbit hole we go. So here's my bare bones explanation of the first game. You play as Alan Wake, a famous thriller novelist who, along with his wife Alice, vacations to the town of Bright Falls, Washington. After Alice goes missing, Alan begins finding manuscript pages from a book that he doesn't remember writing, and soon the events of that book begin coming true. Unbeknownst to most, the nearby lake known as Cauldron Lake is a connection point to an alternate dimension known as the Dark Place, and within resides a powerful entity that seeks to escape into our own reality. This dark presence has the ability to change reality through art, and in capturing Alice is forcing Alan to write a horror story of its escape into our own dimension. Alan is ultimately successful at rescuing Alice and stopping the dark presence, but in the process is trapped in the dark place himself. I want to return to some information I mentioned in the intro about this sequel being released 13 years after the original. It's significant not just in our world, but in the game as well. 13 years is the amount of in-game time that has passed between the two games' events, meaning Alan Wake, the character who vanished in 2010, has been missing and presumed dead all of this time. It's unclear if this narrative direction was what Remedy had intended all of those years ago in 2010, or if it was adopted somewhere later on down the line, but what I can say is that regardless of the why, the large gap in time adds to the game in a way that I hadn't expected. There's something deeply psychological about it being both 13 years in the game and in the real world. 13 years is a long time, and this isn't a time jump like in The Last of Us, where we are told 20 years have passed. Instead, this is Animal Crossing, where 13 years have passed for everyone, including us. It injects this dark and deeply uncomfortable form of nostalgia that I haven't experienced before. It's unfortunate because I imagine these feelings don't exist for players who are brand new or recently introduced to the series, and it's these feelings that will be one of the aspects I remember most about this game. As I've said a couple times now, the best thing Alan Wake 2 does is its world building, but its story starts out incredibly well too. This is one of the best openings to a video game I've played in recent years.
In a horror story, there are only victims and monsters. And the trick is not to end up as either. But trapped by the genre, we are all ripped to pieces along the way.
The game begins with an ominous monologue from Alan set over the dark reflections of a dead deer floating in Cauldron Lake before shifting to a scene of a naked man crawling out from the waters. The game then surprises by giving control of this man over to the player. The journey through the forest is unsettling and made more so because you feel so vulnerable. You make your way towards several lights, but as you approach, figures step out from the shadows carrying knives. This is framed very well, taking me a moment like I imagine it would in the real world to register that these weren't friends and to start backing away before ultimately trying to run away. You are caught by the individuals who refer to themselves as the Cult of the Tree. A ritual is begun as you're stabbed multiple times, strapped to a stone table, and have your heart carved out for unknown reasons. Before the ceremony can be completed, however, two campers stumble upon the scene, causing the cult members to leave the body and give chase. As the body is left on the table, the scene fades and leads to the title card. Immediately afterwards, we are introduced to the same scene but from a new perspective. Saga Anderson, the FBI agent who, along with her partner Alex Casey, have been called in to investigate the series of ritualistic murders that have taken place around Cauldron Lake. The pair are quickly introduced to two Bright Falls deputies, Mulligan and Thornton, who introduce the crime scene that we participated in during the intro. Players walk around and examine different points of interest before being asked to make connections. The Saga half of the game relies heavily on a game mechanic called the investigation board. With the press of a button, Saga enters her mind place, a location within her mind where she can review the cases she's investigating. As players work through crime scenes, have conversations with important characters, or profile targets, they are given information as tangible notes or photographs that can be connected together on the investigation board within the Mind Palace. Your enjoyment of this half of the game is likely determined by your enjoyment of this mechanic. The game uses the investigation board as a means of pushing forward the narrative, making players establish connections between two pieces of evidence gathered in order to progress. And as you get further into the game, the board becomes much more in-depth, looking like something from that scene in It's Always Sunny about Pepe Sylvia. This mechanic is not optional, as the vast majority of the cases in the game cannot be progressed without it. The game requires you to go through the process of attaching clues to the board and allowing Saga, the character, to form her conclusions even if you yourself have already connected the dots. The agents are able to identify the victim as former FBI agent Robert Nightingale, and through Saga's use of profiling the victim, are led towards Cauldron Lake.
Agent Nightingale has been MIA for 13 years. How did he end up here?
Up from the lake that's not a lake. It's dark. He was there too. You are not allowed in the lake until he says otherwise.
Robert Nightingale came from the lake before his murder.
Similar to events of the first game, Saga and her partner soon find a manuscript page that reads as a horror story with them as the characters.
It's for us. The text is about us. The victim was one of their own. FBI Special Agent Robert Nightingale. And then there was the page they found. The first step down into terrifying depths.
Reading the words. These words felt like a message. Someone knew they were here, someone playing a game with them. An invitation. How could they not accept, even if they knew it would end up hurting them?
The pair return to Bright Falls where they meet the local sheriff, Tim Breaker, as well as the witnesses who interrupted the ceremony during the prologue, Tammy and Ed Booker. After profiling the couple, Saga comes to the conclusion that they found a necklace.
The cult of the tree. What aren't the Bookers telling me?
I found their necklace. The symbol is 2 triangles.
The cult wants their spruce tree back, Tammy.
Finders keepers, Ed. My publisher will want this on the cover.
Tammy found something. A necklace belonging to one of the cultists. So you found something there, right? A necklace these cultists may have dropped.
Okay. Wow. How did you put that together?
It's evidence.
The profiling ability is something that Saga utilizes throughout the game, and while it was obvious to me what was actually occurring after the second or third time it's used, it's also one of the few minor criticisms I have about the character of Saga Anderson. It's revealed later in the narrative that Saga, as well as all members of the Anderson family, are seers, meaning they have a power that allows them to see other people's thoughts. This narrative reveal fixed what I originally thought was a lazy plot tool, but it also creates a new problem, namely that Saga's natural abilities as a detective are now less impressive. Does it make her a worse character? No, I don't believe so, but I can't help but wonder if she only has this power because the developers are trying to build their Avengers roster rather than because it was necessary. It's a complex solution for a simple problem. As a seasoned detective, she could have noticed skin slippage on the body, implying it had been in the water. This is actually brought up during the autopsy, but why not earlier? Or perhaps she could have noticed impressions, such as drag marks on the ground. Both of these are simple methods of implying to the player they need to travel towards the lake. Later, she determines the body needs an autopsy, not because that would simply be standard procedure in a homicide, but rather because Nightingale's thoughts say there's something inside his body. This also isn't me saying that the powers should have been removed completely. There are a number of cool moments that occur with them later in the game. I just wonder if there could have been a better way to incorporate them without it seeming like they are the sole reason Saga's competent as a detective. This is actually an insecurity that the character herself brings up towards the end of the game, but strangely not in relation to her powers. As it is, the profiling is simply a means of delivering additional exposition as opposed to an actual investigation tool. This conversation with the Bookers is largely irrelevant, as the couple never meaningfully appear again in the game despite Saga warning them to not leave town. What is relevant, however, is the location this interrogation occurs in, the Oh Dear Diner. A waitress who works at the diner named Rose greets Saga in a way that suggests some sort of shared history, but this also can't be correct because Saga has never been to Bright Falls prior to the events of this investigation.
Saga Anderson, as I live and breathe. I thought we'd never see you back here after that awful, awful thing happened to your baby girl. How are you? I'm sorry. Who are you? I don't know what you're talking about. It's me, silly. Rose. You know me.
I don't think I do. And what horrible thing happened to my baby girl?
She drowned. Your daughter.
Afterwards, you're led to the morgue in the basement of the sheriff's office in order to examine Nightingale's body.
So we share a morgue with the funeral home next door. It's a shoestring budget. I guess you guys don't have that problem, though. Our only coroner rotates between a few other towns, and he's away this week, but you can handle this, right?
I'm qualified to perform examinations. Yes.
Again, this is creating a complex solution to a simple problem. FBI agents aren't trained forensic pathologists, and I only bring this up because I teach a course on forensic science. It's a small detail that the developers go out of their way to do incorrectly. Why not just have the coroner character in the morgue? There's this other deputy who stays in the morgue and gets killed. Why not just have that be the coroner to make this more authentic? I can see that this is probably just a nitpick, but it's still something I noticed. The examination of Nightingale reveals another manuscript page hidden in the open chest wound, which prompts Sheriff Breaker to remember others that they have previously collected.
We found these kinds of pages. I didn't think they were relevant to this case. I have them right here. No, wait.
Sheriff?
What the hell? Show me the clicker.
This scene is very good, as in a matter of seconds, it completely unravels into horror and finally puts us into our first combat encounter. Players are taught that enemies can't see or attack them while they are standing in bright light sources. The safety offered is counterbalanced by making the lights go out if players attack from them or leave the light, meaning players can't easily hop back and forth to cheese enemies. This is a great design decision. Players quickly retrieve their gun and are able to stop Nightingale, but he disappears afterwards. That's the end of the game's first chapter, and as the screen fades to black, we get the first of many end-of-chapter songs. These are completely skippable, but are also a nice little touch in my opinion that builds the atmosphere and experience of the game. So I want to circle back to something I said a bit ago, that this encounter in the morgue was the first combat scenario in the game. For some players, this is where the criticism that the game is a walking simulator comes from, as by my estimation, it's been about an hour and a half of gameplay up to this first encounter. I'm really torn here because I can understand that over an hour of playtime without combat in a game labeled as survival horror is probably too long. However, this also isn't something that bothered me personally, and I ultimately don't think others should be either. The game has done a tremendous job of building the atmosphere, characters, and story up to this point, and I don't think combat authentically fits into the game prior to this moment. Some might argue that that is irrelevant, as this is a video game and as such should have gameplay first and foremost, but to that I'd say that this simply isn't that type of game. Alan Wake 2, despite having a slow opening, is not a walking simulator, and it is disingenuous to say so. This game absolutely has less combat than Remedy's previous game Control or even the original Alan Wake, but at the same time, the combat that is here is twice as thoughtful as it was in either of those games. This all would naturally lead into the discussion on gameplay and specifically combat here, but I want to hold off a bit longer on that until we get further into the narrative. That way we can discuss it from both sections, the Saga side and the Wake side. Saga and Alex find another manuscript page, one dropped by Sheriff Breaker before he vanished, and this directs them back to Cauldron Lake in order to find Nightingale and something called an overlap. We learn a bit more about Saga's partner, Alex Casey, who shares a name with the detective character from Alan Wake's book. Agent Casey has casually been looking into Wake's disappearance himself after previously working a cult case in New York City that involved the writer's books.
The cult was copycatting the murders from the books. In their heads, they were performing a ritual to bring Wake back. Their imagined prophet. After that case, I started looking into Wake's disappearance on the side.
At the crime scene, the pair decide to split up, with Saga following footprints and Casey researching the scene. And can we just say that in 2023, it is incredibly stupid that we are still having law enforcement officers split up like they're in Scooby-Doo, especially when they've literally just seen a man rise from the dead, and know that there's an aggressive murder cult acting out of the woods they are in. And yes, I understand that this happens in survival horror, and that it's even somewhat necessary given that it's raining and the crime scene is outside, but it is still ridiculous given the situation they're in. Through more manuscript pages, Saga learns that she must perform an occult ritual in order to enter the overlap. She fights more cult members who have been taken by the dark presence, retrieves Nightingale's removed heart, which had also disappeared from the morgue, and performs the ritual.
The wave crashed on the far side of the mirror. I brought you the Heart Witch. Show me the terror.
Saga makes her way through a repeating series of environments, and she comments that this appears to be a loop, but it's actually a spiral as things slightly change each time as she gets closer to her goal. Another manuscript page found tells her that Nightingale was sent up from the lake in order to find a light switch, the clicker, which if you're new to the series doesn't mean much, but was a central part of the original game.
Okay. I used to have these nightmares when I was a kid. The dark really spooked me, too. When it got really bad, my mom gave me this old light switch. She called it the clicker.
The clicker, huh?
Yeah. If I ever got scared of the dark, I could just flip the switch and a magic light would scare the monsters away.
Oh, sure.
Here it is.
Alan.
Maybe it'll help you, too.
Yeah, nice story, writer boy.
Nightingale is eventually located within the overlap and serves as the game's first boss. This boss fight is visually quite claustrophobic and frantic as you are chased through the forest, which made it more intense. However, I eventually found it a bit frustrating on my first playthrough, given that there have only been 4 enemies up to that point, and so players haven't had much practice. Specifically with the dodge mechanic, which I initially had a hard time getting the timing down for. Saga is able to defeat Nightingale, and I'll discuss the boss fights a bit more in depth during the combat portion of this video. Saga briefly comes face to face with a projection of Alan Wake before finding herself ejected from the overlap. A flash occurs and she sees a body suddenly appear on the shore of the lake.
Are you okay?
No! It's my fault! It got out with my face! Scratch!
Sir, calm down. I'm gonna need you to take a breath.
He's changed the story. The dark presence. We must stop it before...
Easy now. First things first. What's your name?
My name is Alan Wake. I'm a writer. I've been...
Wake? Where did you come from? You've been missing for 13 years.
Wake is taken to the FBI field office in Bright Falls, and after a short interview, the game shifts to playing as Alan Wake, experiencing his memories of the dark place leading up to his escape.
But yeah, sad to say, I've not written this. I'd remember if I'd written a book, right?
Or maybe it was written by your evil double. Well played, man! That is spot on! Playing the role here. Pretending the world of the book overlaps our own. That's very meta indeed. You see, Initiation tells the story of a fictional writer named Alan Wake, who is trapped in a nightmare, desperately trying to find the manuscript of a novel he has forgotten he has written. The book is set in New York, but it might not be New York at all. He is tormented by his dark doppelganger and guided by visions of a fictional detective he has written. That's right, Alex Casey is in this book as well.
That clip sums up what the Alan Wake portion of this game will all be about, literally.
But isn't that what you sign up for with autofiction? No, but seriously, I found the structure of the reality you build in the book fascinating. It reminded me of The Matrix. I mean, the writer is physically in his writer's room, trapped there, and he projects himself out to this dark dream of New York through the story he is writing.
Alan, trapped in his writer's room, uses his typewriter to project himself out into the dark place reflection of New York City. Everything you play in the Alan Wake side of the game is what he is writing. This is clearly demonstrated by the core gameplay mechanic of this half of the game, his ability to rewrite the scenes. Similar to the Mind Palace mechanic with Saga, with the press of a button, players are swapped back to Alan in his writer's room and can change specific parts of the New York City environment in order to fit where he is trying to go with the narrative. It's not entirely editable and is instead limited to specific rooms on the map. It's him making edits to the dark place in order to somehow find a way to escape. Going forward, I'm just going to be saying Alan, but know that it is actually a projection of him in his story. Experiencing one loop, Alan restarts again at the talk show, being present for an interview between himself, Mr. Dorr, and Sam Lake, explained in-game as the actor that plays the character of Alex Casey, the detective from Alan Wake's novels. This probably warrants a bit of an explanation if you are new to the series. Sam Lake is the creative director at Remedy Entertainment, and for their first game, Max Payne, his face was used for the character. The original Alan Wake established that the character of Max Payne was one wrote by Wake. He was the main character in the thriller novels that made him famous. The real-world rights to the character of Max Payne are owned by Rockstar Games, however, and because of this, Remedy replaced the name Max Payne with Alex Casey. So the character in this scene is supposed to be the actor who played the role in the movie adaptations of Wake's books. This is all in addition to the FBI agent in the Saga storyline, whose name is also Alex Casey and shares the same face. As a side note, this is one of the reasons Sam Lake feels a lot like Kojima. His game features him playing an actor who is playing the character whose face was modeled after him.
That's very meta indeed.
While perhaps a bit pretentious, this does lead to one of my favorite moments later in the game.
I'm not Alex Casey. I only play him in the movies. He's just a fictional character.
What's going on here?
You don't have to kill me. You don't have to go get that knife and stab me. You can just give up and go back. Forget about The ritual sacrifice to open the way forward.
The ritual sacrifice to open the way? A knife in the back? Everything about this was absurd. Our dialogue forced and ridiculous. In desperate need of another pass.
Oh no! Oh no, you don't!
As he attempts to leave the studio, Alan stumbles upon Ahti, the Remedy Connected Universe's version of Nick Fury. If you've not played Control, Ahti first appears in that game and serves as somewhat of a guide for the main protagonist Jesse Faden. We aren't given a clear understanding of who or what Ahti really is, but it is implied in Control that he is a powerful supernatural entity that is tied to the Federal Bureau of Control and the Oldest House. He serves more or less the same role in this game, providing directions for the characters without it needing to be organically earned or make sense narratively. A get-out-of-jail-free card for the narrative, and while I am intrigued by the character and don't think that he needs to be fully explained, I do have to wonder if he was entirely necessary for this plot, and if he was instead written in order to continue to build this connected universe. Ahti is one of the 3 characters that we interact with in The Dark Place that aren't written by Wake, meaning they are separate from the novel he is writing. The others are Mr. Door and Sheriff Breaker, both of which we'll discuss later. Ahti sends Alan to the basement in order to acquire a small lamp shaped like an angel, which according to Alan is written to be the lamp that the powerful light switch clicker was cut from. Using this lamp, light sources can be moved around, changing the environment with them. This is a cool puzzle mechanic that outside of just one encounter I greatly enjoyed. You use this power to reach the streets of the Dark City and begin searching for ways to escape the Dark Place.
Hello?
Alan Wake?
Yes.
Do you know who I am?
No? Who is this?
We'll get to that later. There are spies all over. Shadows.
A sense of deja vu washed over me. Had I had this conversation before?
Alan, listen to me carefully. Caldera Street Station, the subway. You need to go there.
In order to access the Caldini Street substation, you need to capture and move a light source to the lamp above the station. Moving down an alleyway brings Alan face to face with a version of his Alex Casey detective character. This version of Alex Casey is shot immediately after this, but lingers on for the rest of the game as an echo that Wake uses as a source of inspiration for the scenes in his story. After triggering this scene, players will now find enemy shadows roaming the Dark Place, some benign and some hostile. While fighting them is quite similar to the enemies in the Saga chapters, there's a big difference in the presence created by the enemies here versus the Saga chapters. Alan Wake works his way through the subway tunnels, changing the environments or scenes with new plot elements as he uncovers them. I feel like this is kind of complicated to imagine, so here's an example. In a portion of the subway, you discover an echo that provides an inspiration for the plot.
This is the ritual to lead you on. The Fed had witnessed something here that made him run scared. Whether the summoning ritual had been a bona fide supernatural event or the mass psychosis of stark raving lunatics, it didn't change the facts. The cult was messing with things no one should mess with.
And this inspiration can then be used to transform specific locations in order to progress.
The plot changes shape the world around me. The dark presence.
The story he crafts is of a missing FBI agent who ventures deeper into abandoned subway tunnels to locate a murder cult known as the Cult of the Word. Wake eventually arrives at the murder site of the FBI agent, which is reminiscent of the Nightingale murder scene that Saga was investigating. There are faint visuals of a forest, and we get this scene.
An FBI agent? Who are you?
What is this? Who are you?
She can hear me.
I'm Saga Anderson, FBI.
This is Alan Wake. I'm trapped here. The dark place. Under Cauldron Lake.
Cauldron Lake. Who are you?
I'm trying to escape. I'm making progress, but I'm in danger.
This is the other half of the conversation we witnessed as Saga at the overlap. This is all done quite well and retroactively makes previous information make more sense. Overlaps are places where the real world and Dark Place are closest. Nightingale's heart, which had vanished and suddenly reappeared for Saga near the overlap, was from it vanishing on Alan's side. Nightingale himself was an FBI agent murdered by a cult, same as the plot points of Wake's story. Even the overlap location, the tree called the Witch's Ladle, is based around the legend of a witch killing a spurned lawman and cutting out his heart. The events from the real world, either the ones happening in-game or the local legends, are being reflected into the Dark Place, and Wake is following twisted versions of them in order to search for his escape. Back in the shadowy city, Parliament Tower, the place where Alan and his wife Alice lived in New York City, appears. This happens several times throughout Alan's side of the story, and I'm unclear exactly why completing a murder site allows their old apartment to be written into the story, although it's possible I missed something somewhere in a manuscript page or something that explains this. If someone knows the exact reason, please let me know in a comment, as I'd love to actually know what the reason is. It's clearly tied to him getting closer to escaping and his worry about his wife, but it also feels more like an overlap itself. Their apartment contains tangible, real things of his wife, her art, for example. These are things he can interact with too that don't disappear like Nightingale's heart. During this first visit, we learned that Alice has put on a photography exhibit about her experience with Alan, Bright Falls, and the darkness that's followed.
About 6 years ago, I started hearing noises in the night. Typewriter keys clacking. Voices. Alan was back. Haunting me. Then it got violent. It was Alan. And yet, it was a monster.
Alan comes to the conclusion that his evil doppelganger, who goes by the name Scratch, was terrorizing her, and before Alan can give it much more thought, he is looped back into the writer's room where he sees himself shot in the head. We see some sort of shadowy cloud, presumably the Dark Presence, attack Alan off-screen, and we are then reverted back to the Saga timeline. From here forward, players can continue playing as Saga in the present timeline or continue experiencing Alan's memories from within the Dark Place. Think of this now as Act 2. Both characters' stories are available to play through, but both also have a roadblock point that will force players to swap and finish the other characters' chapters before the final act can be started. After control was given back to me, I did something that I'd be curious to know if many others did. I continued playing exclusively as Saga and didn't return to Wake's side of the story until I was forced to. It's not that his side of the story wasn't interesting, it's just that I was hooked by the detective experience that was occurring on the Saga side. Unfortunately, after completing the game this way, my feelings about the narrative were only reinforced. While Alan's storyline is visually stylish and undeniably interesting, it's also empty. I ultimately was along for the ride, but it doesn't contribute much to the actual plot or characters besides creating more questions. Alan's storyline is interesting, whereas Saga's is both interesting and moving the plot forward. The environment, characters, and overall plot of the Saga side are what actually drives the narrative, and Act 2 is when the differences in narrative quality between these two storylines becomes the most apparent. I understand that some of you will likely disagree with this statement, but my hope is that by laying it all out, you'll at least understand where I'm coming from. So let's break this down. I'll still be going through the events of the chapter in more detail after this, but let's quickly go through an overview of what occurs during Act 2. On the Saga side of things, she travels to the town of Watery, meets the Koskela brothers, finds her family trailer where apparently she lived with her daughter, and meets her grandfather Tor and grunkle Odin.
She sees right through us, bro.
She uncovers the Cult of the Tree's hideout, fights deputies Mulligan and Thornton, who are cult members but also become taken. She finds the clicker. The cult attacks the lodge to kill Wake, but the Federal Bureau of Control capture Wake first. The Koskela brothers are revealed to be the leaders of the cult and also captured. Saga travels to the Valhalla nursing home, fights resident Cynthia Weaver, who has been taken by the darkness also, and saves her grandfather Tor. Saga learns she is a seer, learns that her partner is seriously injured, learns that Wake is actually the evil doppelganger Scratch, and learns that the Cult of the Tree were actually the good guys. Finally, she is temporarily able to fight off Scratch, but one of the Koskela brothers is killed during the encounter. This is also not including the overarching mystery that more and more people believe that Saga's daughter is dead.
Sheesh.
Now, on the Alan Wake side, Act 2 consists of him recalling his past through a musical, meeting his anonymous caller Tom Zane, and creating a second murder site within the Ocean View Hotel. Wake returns to Parliament Towers and the writer's room where he finds the manuscript that Scratch is writing. He begins making edits, which include writing Saga and her family into the story, but is killed by Scratch before he can finish it. He awakens again, receives a warning from Mr. Dorr, and retrieves several of his wife's photographs. He shoots Tom Zane before going to his movie theater for the third and final murder site. Finally, after a payphone conversation with himself, he places the retrieved photos that Alice took and places them in a shoebox for something in the future.
Alice's photos you found from the shoebox in the talk show basement. Before you can go to Parliament Tower, you must put them in the shoebox at her statue at the plaza. To help you, to help Alice, to help Saga Anderson.
I'm my own Deus Ex Machina? Really?
Very meta indeed.
And that's it. Placing the photos in the box is Alan Wake's point of no return, wrapping up Act 2. I don't want to get accused of cherry picking, so I'm also going to include the Sheriff Breaker interactions on this list as well. I don't personally believe they deserve to be included on this list, as they don't offer anything meaningful towards the narrative and instead are just bait for the future expansions. However, they are interesting, and I did enjoy locating them.
You snuck up on me.
So what you're seeing on screen right now is the content of these two narratives during the second act, all listed out, and I hope it's clear why I say that there's a difference in quality between these two halves of the narrative. The story is completely dependent on the Saga side of the game for narrative progression. The murder scenes on Wake's side are all very interesting to move through, but their climaxes and really even their primary value are as reflections to the Saga side. Which, in contrast, the Saga side of this act is filled with events and forward action. It is telling a story on its own. You could completely remove the Alan Wake portion of the story and it would largely be the same narrative. However, this can't be said for the reverse. I don't think many people will realize their first time playing how little actually happens in the Wake side of the story. Through his actions, he helps Saga enter each of the overlaps by sending specific items through. This would be Nightingale's Heart, the Anger's Remorse Record, and the Moose Skull, but I kept expecting there to be more. Other callbacks or realizations that he was doing stuff behind the curtains. Originally, I thought it was going to progress to finding plot elements and scene inspirations for the real world, especially after Wake finds the manuscript for a return and begins making edits. I thought we'd be making changes to the other side, or at least be the explanation of why certain things occur. This isn't the case. I'm also not suggesting that the Saga portion of the act is perfect, because it's not.
Fuck me. That's terrible.
So the game proceeds with Saga traveling next to the surrounding town of Watery in order to locate the clicker in a nearby trailer park. This information is determined via a manuscript page once again, and it again represents my main problem with the detective side of this game. That much of the detectiving happens through manuscript pages and Saga entering people's thoughts through profiling, neither of which requires the player to do much on their end. That being said, I have a hard time fully offering this criticism. As I said in my video on Lacuna, the balance in detective games are incredibly difficult to maintain for probably obvious reasons. In a game, you are in control. You have to make the correct connections yourself, and if you don't, in theory, the game is just over. This itself isn't conducive to a fun game, but it also doesn't even work in practice because you can just replay the segment until you get the correct solution. Lacuna felt unique in that it successfully captured the feeling that you could fail during an investigation even when you couldn't. Movies and books largely are able to sidestep this problem because you are experiencing someone else solving the mystery, instead of doing it yourself. I would classify this as a minor criticism because the actual mystery and plot that is occurring in Alan Wake 2 is quite good regardless. Now, once in Watery, we are greeted by the Costello brothers.
You own the trailer park, right? Mind if I take a look inside?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the owner of the Watery Lighthouse Trailer Park, me, can help you with that. It's good to have our funniest resident back.
Resident? I don't understand what you mean.
If this is your way of getting out of any outstanding bills, don't worry. They've been handled.
Must be hard coming back to where you and your little girl lived.
It's like they remember a different reality. Is the horror story messing with their memories?
This is the second time we are told by characters that Saga lived in the community for some time and that her daughter Logan drowned. As suggested by Saga, the dark presence and its story are slowly changing real-world events, but this isn't just false memories, but changing real physical items as well. At the trailer park, Saga locates the trailer her and her daughter supposedly lived in, and within there are items that support this, including a newspaper article about Logan's death.
It's not true. It's just a fucking story. It's not true. Logan's back home. She's fine.
As the game continues, this becomes Saga's main driving force to defeat the dark presence in order to stop the changes it's creating from solidifying. The Costello brothers are two of the highlights of this game. They are central to two of the better reveals. First, that the brothers are the leaders of the Cult of the Tree, and then second, that the cult are actually the good guys. They are well written and acted, particularly at the end of the act when one of them is killed during the encounter with Scratch. It's actually impressive how likable both of these characters are despite not having much screen time, and also because one of the brothers does almost all of the talking for the pair. Prior to meeting them in Watery, you can see several of their product commercials on TV.
Oh no, a bear. Help. Did somebody call for a tour guide? Oh wow, Koskela Brothers Adventure Tours. Unforgettable tour experiences at affordable prices. That's right, I'm Ilmo Koskela, voted best coffee roaster / tour guide by Coffee World magazine, and I'm here to give you the tour of a lifetime. But Ilmo, I've heard the government has seized and restricted access to many local nature attractions. That is true, Janko. Many local attractions have recently become fenced off by the government, and that's why at Koskela Brothers Adventure Tours we say, fuck the government.
This also showcases something I want to give more direct praise to Remedy for. They know how and when to include levity in their games. Horror games don't work if they just continue to build tension endlessly. They become exhausting, and so having small releases of that tension becomes necessary. Remedy understands this and strikes a perfect balance here. And also, at the risk of sounding pretentious, I consider their humor to be smart, as almost none of it is the Marvel style of quipping. I'm actually struggling as I'm here writing this to even think of one example where it's Marvel-like. Alan Wake 2's humor is largely grounded in absurdism, poking fun at itself and just being funny through its sheer weirdness. And to clarify, weirdness does not mean quirkiness. I want to draw that distinction here because quirkiness is something Marvel over-relies on and also does pretty poorly in most cases. In order to access her trailer, Saga needs to retrieve the spare keys from the Coffee World amusement park, a nearby attraction built by the Costello brothers. This is a wonderfully designed section. The visual and sound designs create a distinct identity for the area, simultaneously feeling again absurd but also grounded. Like this shitty little theme park could and probably does exist in the backwoods of Washington somewhere. You acquire the keys, reach the trailer park, and are introduced to two characters from the original game, Tor and Odin Anderson, who we also learn are Saga's grandfather and great uncle, respectively.
It's so good to finally see you, Saga. I am your great uncle Odin. This is your long-lost Motor 5, Tor!
Saga has no recollection of these two and again questions if the story is changing reality. Now, the manuscript page warned Saga would see the clicker for the first time in her trailer in the hands of a cultist, and within she does, but in the form of a photograph of Tor, Odin, and a cult member who is holding the clicker. I find this very clever as it still technically matches the words on the manuscript page, but occurs differently than expected. That being said, I don't think the actual photo makes much sense. Why would this photo be taken in the first place? Like, what would its purpose have been? Based on what we know of them, why would Tor and Odin pose for this picture, and why would it have been in Saga's possession? She doesn't even use this picture to establish a location for the clicker, she instead follows a take-in. The obvious answer here is Wake and or Scratch wrote the story this way, but I don't accept that. It circles back to my point in the intro that just because there's reality-bending writing as a plot mechanic, it doesn't mean that things can just be lazily hand-waved away. In fact, I think it should mean the opposite. If you're going to have that be a part of the story, then it should be thoughtfully explained every time. The truth is that this picture only exists because there needs to be a link established between the Anderson brothers and the clicker, something that will become relevant later on. As the manuscript page also warned, outside Saga would come face to face with a cult member.
Mulligan? What the fuck? Hey! Stay where you are. Mulligan is a cultist? What the fuck is going on here?
The two Bright Falls deputies we met earlier, Mulligan and Thornton, are members of the cult but have also been taken by the darkness. We learn through another manuscript page that they became exposed to the dark presence after accidentally murdering an innocent woman and attempting to dispose of her body. Saga follows the deputies to the workshop of a local motorcycle club, which she uncovers is the Cult of the Tree's headquarters. Through yet another manuscript page, Saga is informed that there's an overlap located in Watery, and that one particular parade float holds the key to opening it.
Is this the parade float the page mentioned?
The overlap formed around Watery's dark past. The ritual to enter was tied to crafting the float. Art was the key. It had the power to let Saga in.
At Cauldron Lake, giving the poem and the heart to the witch sign opened the overlap. Here, it's a parade float.
I want to clarify also that it's established in the game that the motorcycle club builds floats for the annual Deerfest event that occurs in Bright Falls. This isn't just a random parade float, but rather fits into the background that has been established.
Deerfest floats, restaurant floats, floats shaped like things we can't show on television. Our floats are the best way to impress your friends, propose to your partner, or throw shade at an office colleague. And we don't do just Deerfest. Our floats are a perfect gift for weddings, birthdays, bar mitzvahs, or your quinceañería. Our floats will punch up any special occasion.
Saga collects the materials necessary to finish the float, including the skull of the former Coffee World mascot, Mocha the Moose, which is the item connected to Wake's side of the story. She enters the overlap, which is centered on a Coffee World attraction called the Huatari Well. Similar to the legend of the witch and the heart with the previous overlap, the Huatari Well features an old legend of two brothers dumping bodies down the well. This mirrors recent events of the two deputies, Mulligan and Thornton, dumping their victim down the well. Saga is able to defeat Mulligan and Thornton within the overlap and gets another vision of Wake before returning to the real world. Here, the game shifts back to Bright Falls, where Alan and Agent Casey are assaulted by a group of cultists attempting to kill Wake. Casey is forced to leave him in order to try and stop the attack, but Alan eventually exits the lodge anyways in order to find the agent. Wake is quickly overwhelmed by Scratch's presence and passes out, where he is then found by the cultists.
FBI, drop the knife! Elmo?
Saga, you don't understand!
Agent Anderson. Agent Kieran Estevez, Federal Bureau of Control. I'll take it from here. Out cold.
Wait, this is my case.
This is no longer an FBI investigation. The case has been transferred to us.
This is bullshit.
Noted.
This serves as the game's biggest what the fuck moment, as up to this point we've only gotten winks and nods to the Federal Bureau of Control, and it was unclear if they'd have a larger role in the game or not. For those who haven't played Control, this is the organization that game was about, the Federal Bureau of Control, or FBC for short, a shadowy government agency that works to contain supernatural threats. Agent Estevez is the FBC field agent referenced but not seen at the end of the second expansion for Control. Saga is removed from the case, her partner Alex Casey is missing, and Alan Wake, as well as the Costello brothers, are taken into custody by the FBC. Saga is concerned because Wake seems to be the only person that knows how to utilize the clicker, and so as such is the only person that could use it to rewrite the story and save Logan. As I'm writing this for the script, it truly feels like this is the climax, or perhaps even the beginning of the end. The game has built up so much momentum with its narrative by this point that it is unfortunate to finally say that this is the point it begins to lose steam. There is another 3 full areas to explore by my count in this next chapter: the whole surrounding Bunker Woods, the Valhalla nursing home, and then the wellness center. There's another full overlap, complete with the usual 3 loops and another boss fight. It undeniably has great moments, has incredible atmosphere, and even a new enemy type, but it still comes at the cost of losing some of that what the fuck energy the game has built up so well up to this point. And that's not even factoring in the Alan Wake half of this act either, which has nothing that even comes close to this moment with the Federal Bureau of Control showing up, although I imagine many will disagree with that statement and cite his musical chapter. And while I would say that Saga's second act lands on its feet with a strong ending, this chapter in particular stands out because the story begins to lose focus. This chapter sees Saga decide to go and find Tor and Odin Anderson because they must know something about the clicker given they were in the picture with it found in her trailer. Rose, the waitress from the diner in Bright Falls, works at the nursing home as well and is initially hesitant to let Saga in given the time of day as well as because of the behavior of her relatives, but then she just leaves Saga to wander around. And Ahti is apparently a resident of the nursing home too, because sure, why not? This last one is particularly confusing to me because if you're going to include Ahti, who has served as a guide for both Jesse Faden in Control but also Alan Wake himself over on his side, why not just have him fully do the same thing for Saga here? He could be the reason she is drawn to the nursing home instead of this jump to conclusion regarding the picture she found in her trailer. Instead, Ahti could cryptically hint she'll find what she needs here, which subsequently brings us to the next issue, that nothing done in the nursing home segment gives the narrative forward progress. Saga initially goes there in order to see what her grandfather and Grunkle know about the clicker and if there's a way to use it without Wake. She rescues Grandpa Tor from an overlap only to learn that no, she still needs Wake to change the story and save her daughter. This changes nothing about the situation. Alan Wake is still in the custody of the FBC. Saga is still dismissed from the case, and her daughter is still in danger. She still has no bargaining chip with the FBC. Afterwards, Saga returns to the sheriff's office in Bright Falls to demand to see Wake, but the station has been attacked by Taken, and so the FBC custody narrative hurdle is resolved through nothing you personally do. Even the boss you fight here, named Cynthia Weaver, is a character introduced just this chapter. Unless I missed something, you have no interactions with her prior to this. She is a returning character from the original game, much like Nightingale, but doesn't get the build-up in this game that he receives. You just get a full-screen jump scare from her every 10 minutes and then kill her in the overlap. As a very short aside, I've seen a lot of discourse around the game's use of jump scares, particularly in this chapter where they feel overused. I somewhat agree with this, but not specifically because they are overused, but rather because they are unearned. Not all jump scares are equal. There's a point later in the game where you're stuck in the Mind Palace as Saga, and as you're exiting the investigation board, an enemy pops up behind you. This happened and I about jumped out of my chair. However, afterwards I had a smile on my face. Why? Because I had gone through most of the game expecting this jump scare. Just from a game and visual design standpoint, this seemed like the perfect place to have an unexpected enemy appear, and I would guess many players felt the same. I went through the whole game expecting it, and it never came. I eventually dropped my guard, and then it fucking happens. It felt earned because I'd been lulled into a false sense of security. Random jump scares can be fine, but here they become progressively more unearned with each use. So, what could be done to give this chapter better narrative progression? How do we better tie this chapter into the goal of getting the clicker to wake? Getting that bargaining chip with the Bureau? Because that's really the main problem here. Everything else from the level design, atmosphere, and even method of opening the overlap is done really well. I know that providing suggestions and changes to the story are something that can rub some viewers the wrong way. It can be seen as entitled or like I'm saying that I know how to make a better video game, and I want to be clear that that is not my intention, but at the same time, a critique is supposed to identify problems and work to provide solutions in order to strengthen the author's point, regardless of what that point is. Because of this, I always try to offer suggestions that change as little as possible about what is already present, and in this case, the solution would be swapping a conversation that occurs in this chapter with one from the previous, specifically the conversations with Wake in the overlaps.
The FBI. Saga Anderson. I'm closer now. I can feel it. You helped me get closer to escaping.
Wake? Where are you? Is this coming from the dark place when you were still trapped? I have the clicker. We can finish this.
Without the clicker. You can help. I must find it.
I already have it. I can get it to you.
This is the conversation that occurs as it is currently, after completing the third overlap at the nursing home. Saga asks Wake about writing her daughter into the story but doesn't get an answer. Her motivation after the conversation is exactly the same: get Wake to use the clicker to save her daughter, but provides no new information. Now, I want to show you the conversation that occurs at the end of the second overlap, the one in Coffee World.
Saga Anderson, listen.
Wake?
I've been tricked. Scratch wrote. I tried to fix the story, but has it now. It's the key to escape.
What do you mean, escape? You're already out. So is Scratch.
We're making progress.
When I saw this, I took it to mean that the real Wake was still trapped in the dark place and that the Wake present in Bright Falls was actually Scratch. This is only about half correct, but regardless, it provides exactly the narrative progression missing at this point. The conclusion that the Alan Wake in custody is actually Mr. Scratch. This is information the character didn't have before and gives Saga some sort of tangible value to the Bureau. As the story currently sits, nothing even comes of this conversation at the overlap. No one ever brings it up again, and it becomes irrelevant soon after. With this swap, it at least becomes a driving point for the narrative, and it builds to the reveal we quickly get in the next chapter that Alan is Mr. Scratch. Having this swap occur with the overlaps also increases the stakes because now not only does Saga need Wake to rewrite the story, but she's not even truly sure where Wake is. It's a terrifying prospect, especially because, as we'll see, even her partner Alex has had his memory warped into believing Logan is dead.
What do you, Logan is gone. She has been. For a long time.
Casey's affected by the horror story too.
This improvement feels obvious to me, so it seems likely it would have been to Remedy Entertainment as well, which makes me wonder if this is how the narrative was originally structured. Then perhaps maybe it got rearranged later due to the desire for the disjointed structure of the characters' conversations. What I mean by that is Saga's second overlap is Wake's third murder site, and Wake's second is Saga's third. So their conversations in the overlaps are not together linear. This means there would need to be a bit of shuffling things around in Wake's timeline in order to make this change work, but that's fine because his story is already so abstract and doesn't have much of a story anyways. Making this change fixes the problem with the narrative while also maintaining all of the good moments already in this chapter, of which there are a lot. This chapter reveals that Saga is a seer, and during her profiling of her grandfather and great uncle, there are cool scenes of them actually taking control of the mind place and physically being there themselves. I've mentioned some of the locations this chapter requires players to travel through, such as the wellness center and the flooded basement of the nursing home, and both of these locations are excellent when it comes to their atmospheres. This is also the best overlap, in my opinion. The nursing home was built over an old military bunker where a teenage girl tragically drowned, and so the overlap itself has Saga moving through the dark bunker. The boss fight against Cynthia Weaver also feels unique, with the first stage forcing you to quickly move from platform to platform as you avoid Miss Weaver, who is lurking in the water. I think I even consider the ritual to open the overlap my favorite. It involves you retrieving and then playing a record called Anger's Remorse that Tor and the band Old Gods of Asgard wrote.
The song will show me the way.
Look in the mirror, cobweb of my soul, my face forever, seeking to be whole. Driven by passion, raging like a storm.
The overlap is at the pond. Fuck. Here we go.
This is actually the scene that I mentioned in the intro of this video that incorporates music and is one of my favorite moments in the whole game despite being a small one. Tor is rescued and Saga comes to accept that both he and Odin are her relatives. She returns to Bright Falls to find that the sheriff's station has been attacked by Taken. Saga is able to defend Agent Estevez and a now located but injured Alex Casey from the Taken, as well as get the power for the station up and running again. This ultimately leads her to the cells where Alan Wake and the Koskela brothers are being held.
Don't fucking give it to him! He's a fucking monster, Saga! There it is. We've been waiting for you, motherfucker. I'm gonna fucking destroy you!
In the moment, it appears as if the characters were tricked, that the Alan Wake they had been interacting with was actually Mr. Scratch in disguise. Saga, being pursued by Scratch, scrambles to start various light generators around the back lot in what I consider to be a pretty awful boss fight. You stun him so you can start generators, but the problem is that I ran out of ways to stun him, and so I couldn't proceed and had to restart. I'm not sure if I was doing something wrong here, but I found the only ways to put him in his stunned state were the flashbang grenades or the single-use flare launchers. Everything else seemed ineffective. He walks right through the hand flares, for example. During my first attempt, I was able to start 2 of the 3 generators before I ran out of items, and then I just sort of ran around trying to figure out something I had missed, like perhaps items tucked away. Eventually, I just restarted. I also think it's entirely possible that Remedy knowingly made this fight awful because they figured, why not, since they were incorporating one of the awful parts of Control in it as well, the generator cubes.
Very meta indeed.
Eventually, Saga is successful at getting the light array turned on, and in doing so is able to force Scratch to retreat. You reconvene with the other characters and formulate a plan to summon the real Wake out of the dark place. You also learn from Ilmo about the cult's real intentions.
The cult is my craziest idea that ever worked. Look, what kind of a cult calls themselves a cult? Exactly. We protect Watery and Bright Falls. We're the good guys. A secret neighborhood watch. Well, that was the idea anyways. Look, we've always known about the horror inside the lake. When any Taken come out, we kill them.
You don't turn people into Taken. You kill the ones who already have.
And this marks the point of no return for Saga's story. Unfortunately, the high this moment left me on was completely worn away because I still had Alan's entire second half to complete before I could continue. This leads to the criticism that I wish the game didn't give you the option to choose who you wanted to play as and just made the decision for you. Needing to revert back to Wake's story completely killed the pacing of the game for me, especially because it feels so detached from what went on this storyline. And because even its climax doesn't reach these same highs, and while it was better hopping back and forth between the storylines, this also didn't completely fix the pacing issues for me. The Alan Wake side of this game was the strangest gaming experience I had this year, or at least it would have been had I not found a dead NPC in Baldur's Gate 3 with the name Kaldani. The most interesting thing narratively about the Alan Wake side of this story was seeing what was going on with its few side characters, Sheriff Breaker, Mr. Door, and Tom Zane to be specific. A distant second to that was seeing how the murder scenes would relate back to the Saga side of the story. Unfortunately, neither one of these has much substance to offer, and this ultimately ties into my greater criticisms for the entire Alan Wake portion of this game. That it's more interested in being flashy and having interesting implications than actually telling a story. However, I want to stay focused specifically on Act 2 for right now. The bulk of the gameplay in Alan's second act come from the two murder sites, one at the Ocean View Hotel and the other at Poet's Cinema. They are dark place reflections of real-world events or legends that, due to the concentration of dark history, allow for a thinning of the veil between the dark place and the real world, hence the overlaps. Getting to these locations are supposed to be key to Alan's goal of escaping the dark place, as after the first overlap conversation with Saga, he feels closer to escaping. It's also implied that it's helping him in other ways, such as retaining his memory, as it's said by several characters that he's been stuck in a mindless loop for at least some portion of the 13 years that he's been missing.
Hello?
Alan Wake?
Yes.
Do you know who I am?
No? Who is this?
We'll get to that later.
Sorry. Have we met?
Memory problems again, huh? Yeah, we've met. Tim Breaker.
All these rules. Endless, convoluted loops you insist on going through.
As I've mentioned, these murder sites are interesting to move through, but the problem lies in their actual narrative value. The stories that unfold within the scenes are simply a story that Alan is creating in the writer's room in order to thin the veil on his side and create an overlap. These characters' events and deaths are meaningless. Interesting for sure, it's no coincidence that both of these scenarios involve an Alex Casey investigating a cult named the Cult of the Word in New York City.
You've heard the stories about what happened in New York. Some of it, at least. Bodies started to pile up. It was a murder cult. Turns out the fragments sent to me were from the crime books of Alan Wake. The cult was copycatting the murders from the books. In their heads, they were performing a ritual to bring Wake back. Their imagined prophet.
There's clearly thought that went into how these were written. This is interesting, but do something with it, these connections end up having no impact on the narrative occurring within the game.
You got me. Good prank, very funny.
The game's second murder site is within the Ocean View Hotel, where Alan crafts the story of Detective Alex Casey investigating a murder within the hotel, a theater play about a murder cult that led to real murders.
What was the scene in this room?
Well, this is what we call the writer's room. In the play, it's where the devil rewrites reality whilst God is asleep. The devil was our star role. I got a big-time celebrity to play him, and he was method acting the role to perfection. He never broke character, always wore the cult mask. His name was scratched out on the posters.
Mm-hmm. And who was this mystery celebrity? Let me guess. Alan Wake?
I wish I could tell you, but turns out there were masks upon masks.
The third and final site is based at the Poets Cinema, again featuring Detective Casey, now piecing together connections between the murder cult Thomas Zane himself and a film known as Nightless Night. The Poets Cinema was the far more interesting of the two because it ties more directly into whatever the hell is going on with many of the interesting side characters, Ahti, Alex Casey, and Tom Zane. After finishing the overlap, players can actually return to the theater hall and watch the full 15-minute Nightless Night film from the murder site narrative. I liked this quite a bit, actually, and I think it's mostly because of how weird it is along with the subject matter. While completely optional, it makes implications about the motivations of Thomas Zane, showing the detective character Alex Casey being sacrificed in order to release Zane from the dark place. In a game full of hidden meanings and symbolism, this feels a bit too on the nose, though, so my guess is that this serves as misdirection for Zane's actual motives. In both cases, the murder site leads to an overlap, a disjointed conversation with Saga, and then a visit to Parliament Towers to search for clues about Alan's wife Alice. Rinse and repeat. The gameplay doesn't feel like you're actually tangibly making progress towards escaping via what you're doing within the gameplay. It feels like you're stuck in a, wait for it, loop. And perhaps that's the point. I know that many of the game's fans want to believe that that's the case and that it's brilliant because of it. I found it to be disappointing. I thought the game was ultimately going to reveal that Alan Wake was causing the murders on the Saga side via the stories he was writing at the murder sites. That his writing caused Mulligan and Thornton to kill the innocent woman, or that he caused Cynthia Weaver to be drowned in the bathtub. This could have added a real weight to his narrative, reinforcing that Alan himself has become the villain in his attempt to escape, something that meshes with the third act reveal that Alan is the entity that harassed his wife Alice, because Alan is Mr. Scratch. It also fits suspiciously well with one of the themes of the game, that monsters wear many faces, something that is said in its opening minutes.
In a horror story, there are only victims and monsters. And the trick is not to end up as either. But trapped by the genre, we are all ripped to pieces along the way. This is not the story I hoped it would be. This is not the ending I wanted. This story will eat us alive. This story is a monster. Monsters wear many faces.
This is implying that the monsters often aren't those that you expect. There's not really any follow-up or payoff to these themes. We don't get any sort of compelling narrative progression similar to what we get on the Saga side. Instead, we get this.
Come on in the listen, lost words you've been missing. Now the fire you're bearing, the eye of the darkness, your light.
Despite the implication of my last sentence, know that I did mostly enjoy this segment. If you've seen my video on Control, that might come as a surprise to you because I spent several minutes of that video going over why the ashtray maze is mislabeled and overrated. My enjoyment of it here actually came as a surprise to me as well, because the two segments, the Ashtray Maze and We Sing here in Alan Wake 2, are very similar. You move through a visually interesting and changing set piece, killing waves of spawning enemies as a rock song plays over it all. The difference for me here has nothing to do with the structure, song, or interesting visuals, but rather the combat. Thinking about this segment afterwards is actually what convinced me that the combat in Alan Wake 2 is an improvement over Control's. In Alan Wake 2, there are less enemies thrown at you overall, but each requires more of your attention and your resources. I died several times during the musical number because I ran out of ammo, yet I was still engaged with the game as I went through the scenes again. Now, I said I mostly enjoyed this segment, and that's because the combat doesn't actually start until the final third of the musical, which means the first two-thirds is spent just walking through the set pieces. Alan Wake, more like Alan Walk, am I right? Listen, I know many people like this, and even I enjoyed the first third where it felt quite novel, but then it just continues going with sections where you're forced to just walk or stand around until that part of the song finishes. The song and set pieces are cool, but they shouldn't come at the cost of making players think they are doing something wrong or just railroading them into standing there.
You gotta figure it out to bring this song to its end.
Alan gets another mysterious phone call at the payphone and is directed to the Ocean View Hotel in order to meet the caller. Inside the hotel, Alan is connected to the caller, Tom Zane, through a film screen and transported to the room 665.
You're the one who's been calling me.
Indeed. I'm Tom Zane. Welcome to the House of Zane. You and me, Alan. We're in this together. Two artists collaborating, remember? Crafting the keys to our escape. Your magnum opus, Return, and its companion piece, my film. Sharing our life-altering visions, a melding of higher minds.
This is one of the most enigmatic characters in the entire game for me. Tom claims to be another artist trapped in the dark place, a filmmaker, and at the next murder site based in his theater, we can see one of his films. More importantly, in the real world as Saga, we can also stumble upon a version of that same film as well as movie posters. So this much feels true, but also perhaps it doesn't, because at the nursing home on Saga's side, you can find a journal entry from Cynthia Weaver that adds a wrinkle to this. She is connected to Tom Zane, and she writes about finding a newspaper article that calls him a filmmaker, but that this is wrong, that Zane was a poet, and this is consistent with what Alan himself remembers. So this leads to the mystery of who or what exactly Thomas Zane is, why he is involved, and in what regard is he a real-world individual. This is a mystery that the game doesn't answer, and that's good in my opinion. For all my gripes about the game's writing, this isn't one of them. Thomas Zane isn't a primary focus of the narrative as it currently is, and like Ahti, I don't think needs to be properly explained because of this. That being said, I do think the most likely scenario is that Thomas Zane is just Alan Wake further along in the spiral escape process. At the end of Act 2, Alan receives a phone call from himself.
It wasn't Zane. It wasn't Scratch either. Huh? You're me? Me? I don't understand. There's a lot I don't understand.
The dark place operates in loops. Time is a story. I'm calling you from a different point in that story.
And this isn't ever something we do on the other side, which suggests that there are multiple wakes at multiple points in the process, something the downloadable content or third game will likely continue to explore. Thomas Zane being a persona crafted in order to help earlier versions of himself along seems to fit, especially because in this game, Zane serves as a guide for Alan, specifically to help locate murder sites. This also makes the most sense in my opinion as to why many of the wise/supernatural characters like Ahti and the Anderson brothers refer to Alan as Tom. They know that Alan and Tom are the same person.
Ah, Lorraine. There you are, Tom.
You take care of things on this side. Don't screw it up, Tom!
The game also already features some level of time travel with the summoning event that occurs in Act 3, so I can imagine a scenario where at the end of the series, Alan, now calling himself Tom Zane, is dropped in the past and must continue to play the role of Zane, including as an occasional villain, in order to create the events of the series. Circling back to the Nightless Nights film, he is being hard implied there to be the villain, killing Alex Casey in order to finally be released, and I think this is just Zane playing the role he needs to in order to get Wake where he needs to be. This could also explain why Sheriff Breaker was brought to the Dark Place, so that he could become part of the time travel plot, given that he is essentially the stand-in for the time travel Quantum Break character. I'll circle back to this in a little bit. This also to some degree fits with why Zane gets startled by the brief television appearances of Jesse Faden and Dr. Darling, because perhaps he's worried they and the Bureau will interfere with his process, which would be the most artist thing imaginable.
When you're lost in your own company. And cut! Oh. Now that is drama.
It's Thomas Zane that steers Wake towards both of the murder sites visited during this act, but outside of that, he has a relatively small role in the game. During your first visit to his hotel room, he claims that Alan wrote the manuscript Return, but Alan is later able to debunk this after finding the manuscript himself. For reference, the Return manuscript is the source of the pages Saga finds on her side. The edits and changes made to the pages are what Alan himself manages to edit of the novel prior to Scratch finding and killing him. On the follow-up visit to Zane afterwards, we learn that he actually knew Scratch wrote Return and had knowingly worked with him in order to escape.
You'd given up. You stopped writing. You said it was too dangerous, that we didn't deserve to get out. And then he showed up. Scratch. He promised to write. To get me the hell out of here. He was magnificent. A visionary. I mean, it was art.
Alan Wake is forced to shoot Zane after he attempts to take control of the scene, although we are shown in the camera footage afterwards that Thomas Zane wasn't actually killed. And that's the last we see of the character. Outside of Zane and Ati, the only other characters on this side of the story are Mr. Dorr and Sheriff Breaker. In between visiting the murder sites, Wake continues to appear on the talk show named In Between with Mr. Dorr, where he is interviewed by the host, Warland Dorr. These typically are more humorous and lighthearted, serving as a way of explaining to players new and returning what is going on. The musical is one such example of this. The most interesting of these occurs on the final visit, where Wake is instead confronted by Mr. Dorr about his actions.
You are so lucky, you know. There are so many people helping you. Armies of people. Myself. Your wife.
Alice. I need to get to her. She's in danger.
She is. Because of you. And so is someone important to me, someone you pulled into this. You keep opening doors, peeking in, reaching through to get what you want, and that puts you in my path.
Mr. Dorr is Saga Anderson's father. It might seem like I'm underplaying what is surely an important plot point, but nope. This plays almost no part in the narrative as it is in the game. We get conversations about Saga's father as she interacts with the Anderson brothers, and while it's never outright said that it's Mr. Dorr, I don't think Remedy could have made it any more obvious.
Mom wouldn't talk about my father. You knew him?
Some doors are better left closed.
This is interesting, but there isn't anything else to say here. What's more interesting is what's going on between Mr. Dorr and Sheriff Breaker. In the first chapter, where Sheriff Breaker was blinked away before he could hand the manuscript page to Saga, we see a flash of Warland Dorr. Breaker is brought to the Dark Place after that encounter by Mr. Dorr and begins a search afterwards to locate the man. These two characters and their relationship don't get much development here, like everything else on this side of the narrative, and it's almost certainly going to be the focus of the upcoming Night Springs expansion because in-game clues heavily suggest as much.
This has gone on long enough. This and our Night Springs. It was a nice distraction.
I heard you humming again.
Yeah, I can't get this song out of my head. It's a real earworm. I hear it in my dreams.
I know that song you keep humming. It's the theme from Night Springs.
That old sci-fi show?
Throughout the Dark Place, Wake can find Sheriff Breaker in safe rooms and chat with him about his investigation into Mr. Dorr. There's no resolution to this in the narrative, but it does provide ties into the larger Remedy-connected universe. Sheriff Breaker is an alternate, seemingly multiversal version of the character Jack Joyce from the Remedy game Quantum Break, with this switch occurring for the same reasons as the Alex Casey Max Payne ones. Another company owns the Quantum Break IP, and so Remedy are unable to use it officially in their connected universe. Breaker's conspiracy board grows with more and more information as you locate him at different stages in the game, with clear references to Control being among the notes. I don't feel comfortable offering much more speculation or analysis on this as I haven't played Quantum Break and I don't have the necessary hardware to do so. Even with a lack of understanding of that game, however, I found these interactions to be more interesting than the actual Wake storyline. But as I unfortunately continue to say, nothing comes of them in this game. It's all intrigue and no conclusion. Saga has the final and only real narratively meaningful interaction with Sheriff Breaker in the entire game, and it's just getting the manuscript page back from the opening. Mr. Dorr vanishes after that confrontation with Wake, but Saga profiles him in the final act and literally says that he isn't important right now.
Opening too many doors. This isn't important right now. I can look into it later.
I personally wanted more of these characters instead of the singing. This returns to my point that this side of the game is more interested in setting up things for the expansions or whatever the next game in the Remedy connected universe is, as opposed to telling a complete story in this game. Mr. Dorr, Sheriff Breaker, and Tom Zane are all examples of this, as each one of them is introduced into the plot, involved in at least one major part of the narrative, and then receive no resolution. Each one could also be removed, and the plot would more or less be the same in this game. I want to emphasize this game because, yes, they will likely be more important characters going forward, but that doesn't make them important or well written in this story now. I personally don't think this is good storytelling, and you might disagree with me, which is okay. The second act ends with Alan retrieving several of Alice's photos from the basement of the studio at Auti's suggestion, and then placing them in a shoebox outside of Parliament Towers in order to mysteriously set up events for the future. This is a good place to pause with the discussion of the narrative finally in order to discuss the game's combat and its side content. Alan Wake 2 has overall better combat than Control. That's an opinion that I doubt many of you watching right now agree with, especially because the two games don't share the same genre, so how could that be a fair comparison? Control's combat is designed to be more arcadey and chaotic. It's structured around feeling badass as you destroy enemies. This is in contrast to Alan Wake 2, which strictly adheres to the survival horror rules set in place by games like Resident Evil. This means a lower total number of encounters, but with a higher intensity per encounter, while also relying heavily on resource and ammo limitations. If you've watched other videos on my channel, then you know that I'm a fan of thoughtful combat systems. I consistently bring up The Last of Us Part 2 as what I consider to be one of the most engaging third-person combat systems ever made. I'm mentioning it once again here not just because it gets me off, but more importantly because it would be unprofessional of me to not mention that bias up front, because Alan Wake 2's combat is closer to The Last of Us Part 2's than it is Control's. Combat is slower and more curated as the game no longer spawns wave after wave of enemies for you to mindlessly gun down, and instead it focuses on small pockets of deliberately placed enemies. Saga's movement doesn't feel nearly as good as Ellie's, but from even the early combat encounters, it was already a huge improvement in my eyes. It would be impossible for me to not look at this game's combat through the lens of the cues it took from the game I consider to be the gold standard. However, I want to be clear that its resemblance to The Last of Us is not why I think Alan Wake 2's combat is better than Control's. I don't want to repeat myself much here because I already go through many of the problems that Control's combat has in its own video. But quickly said, it suffers from lack of gun and power progression, meaning all the upgrades feel the same. There's no ammo consideration, which means you don't have to think about how you use your toolkit. And finally, the game's enemy variety doesn't matter. These three factors ended up compounding one another and making for a system that, while flashy, has no substance, and eventually devolves into every combat encounter feeling identical. These problems are not symptoms of the genre of game Control is in, but rather its design. They are universal problems and as such make it fair game for comparison. Alan Wake 2 fixes, to varying degrees of success, each of these issues. Let's start with what I consider the least impactful fix, the ammo consideration. Alan Wake 2, in theory, has limited resources, which is a good thing. However, in practice, the item spawning system can be severely taken advantage of. The game decides what will spawn in containers by reading your inventory, so if you empty your inventory of flares by placing them in the storage shoeboxes, then the game will begin spawning you flares thinking you've gone through them all. This is an easy problem to avoid, just don't abuse the system, but mechanically it does somewhat undercut the horror aspect of having limited ammo at all by having a system that spawns what you need. Next, we have the enemy variety. Alan Wake 2 has roughly the same amount of variety as the original game, and on paper, about half of what Control has. And while I think it would have benefited from just one or two more, it does manage to make the few different enemies it does have feel like threats that require different strategies. It's not the size of the roster that matters here, but rather how they are used. According to the wiki, there are 6 different non-boss enemies on the Saga side, although I'd say that that's really more like 5 in my opinion. You have the Taken that run at you, the guys who zip around and throw axes, the big boys who move slow and swing large objects, the ones that crawled out of the human centipede, and then finally the dark Taken wolves. For reference, the wiki also includes a Taken cultist as the 6th enemy type. However, I didn't feel like they actually played differently from the ones that charged you, so I'm grouping those two together. The game does an okay job of mixing and matching 3 of these types together: the runners, the throwers, and the big boys. These 3 enemies will make up the majority of combat encounters, with the other 2 being used much more conservatively throughout the game. As I'm writing this and reviewing footage, I can't remember or find one situation where the Taken wolves are grouped with any of the other types. Instead, you will face larger packs of exclusively them. This is unique because of their tactics of running out of view and then eventually revealing themselves while lunging at the player. With 1 or even 2, this feels good, hectic but still manageable. The other enemy, the human centipede one, is referred to as the Taken Diver in-game and is a fantastically creepily designed enemy that has an interesting mechanic of diving out of view and creeping towards you. However, I wish a bit more had been done with them. Outside of that diving mechanic, they don't offer much difference in play besides being able to grab you and being a bullet sponge. However, I think these are exactly the abilities that would have complemented their pairing with other enemy types. They would function more as a player disruption enemy versus a straight up damage dealer. Unfortunately, it felt like the game wasn't confident that it could pair them with other enemies or throw more than 2 of them together at a time outside of the summoning event in the 3rd act. They're also introduced so late in the game during the nursing home chapter, and because of that, there aren't many opportunities to incorporate them into combat encounters outside of that event. All this was to say that while the overall number of enemy types does feel low and that there could be more mixing and matching amongst them, the overall encounter design feels like an improvement. I would consciously be switching between my full set of weapons and tools or having to prioritize specific targets in encounters based on which enemies were present. This is not something I ever had to do in Control, even when harder enemies were introduced. I do think there was a missed opportunity here for more visually different enemies. Outside of the wolves and the taken divers, everything else you fight are just humanoid enemies, including the bosses. In the original game, we had objects possessed by the darkness, like the train car, and then the evil flock of birds, and while I'm personally happy neither of those returned, it does feel like something is missing given the heritage of the first game, especially with the bosses. Each one is visually interesting, but simply another human. Hilariously, I was actually so sure that the game was going to introduce a dark taken moose as the boss of the Coffee World overlap. When Saga first encounters the taken wolves, she makes a comment about how animals are being affected too.
Even the animals are turning into monsters.
This to me was the developers planting the seed for another dark taken animal to appear later on. The game references the mascot of the theme park, Mocha the Moose, a number of times, from signs in the park to the carved wooden statues to even the Koskela brothers discussing the creature's death in one of Saga's profilings.
Poor Mocha Moose. He never failed to amuse me. Now we know, Ilmo, there is such a thing as too much coffee. Mocha will live on in a place of honor. He lost his head.
When you discover the cult's hideout in the biker garage, Saga also discovers a manuscript page that references a monster being left in order to stop her.
Mulligan and Thornton had gone there, taken the clicker, left this monster here to stop her.
I was so sure it was going to be Mocha brought back from the dead. I was obviously wrong here, and I'm not saying that this should have been what occurred. I'm not entirely convinced it would even fit, given how the moose skull acts as the key between Alan and Saga activating the overlap. However, the point is that I kept expecting an escalation in terms of the types of enemies or bosses we fought, and that never happens. Finally, we have the weapon variety and progression, which is the most impactful of the three changes Alan Wake 2 makes. Saga's weapons actually feel different from one another and situationally relevant. You acquire the weapons throughout the campaign, but each is also optional, requiring a small puzzle in order to access as opposed to just buying them from a menu. For each gun, there is also at least one upgrade that changes how the gun can operate, creating different ways to play. Here's an example. With the hunting rifle, you can purchase an upgrade called Kill Shot, which adds a feature that if you stand still long enough as you're aiming, you can enter a focus mode that deals more damage. It creates a risk versus reward playstyle, especially given that many of the enemies, such as the wolves, are hypermobile. Deciding whether to risk taking that shot or simply dodging out of the way was a decision I always enjoyed making. Another example is with the crossbow, which has an upgrade called Magnetic Pull that means any bolts shot into an enemy will attract bullets towards that enemy. I found this to be incredibly effective against the wolves, as once I got a bolt in, I could swap to the pistol and just fire in their general direction to kill them. These upgrades are both meaningful and interesting. They are also tied to one of the collectibles on Saga's side, meaning that players were incentivized to explore the levels. The one drawback I want to mention, however, is that I felt the pistol lost much of its value at about the game's halfway mark. This may be a common occurrence in video games in general, but typically not with horror games. For example, Resident Evil 2 Remake keeps their pistols relevant by introducing things such as alternate high-caliber rounds that deal greater damage, and Dead Space's starting weapon, the plasma cutter, is arguably the best weapon in the game. I'm ultimately willing to accept this drawback because the weapon upgrade progression is a major step up from the mod system of Control, but I still wanted to point it out. You may have noticed that so far in this section, I've only been using examples from the Saga side of the game, and that was deliberate. I found the Saga side of combat to be a somewhat large improvement to the combat systems of Remedy's other games. However, the Alan Wake side of the game's combat reminds me a great deal of the combat in Control, particularly with its tedium. Wakeside has, from what I can gather, only two enemy types, a default close range one and one that teleports around while doing a quick series of slashes. The default variety has an alternate type of attack they can use, an explosive tracking projectile. However, I'm not sure exactly what triggers this attack. I remember seeing the projectile only a handful of times through his campaign, and from my footage, there weren't attack triggers I noticed. Firstly, this is a problem. Only two enemies doesn't allow for any real variation, but the solution the game attempts to offer in order to counterbalance this lack of variety also isn't good. It's the numerous benign shadow figures that walk around. The idea likely was that by having these shadows present, players will constantly have a source of tension because you are unsure of what's a real enemy. If they are present alongside actual enemies, it also adds intensity trying to identify the real targets. This is good in theory, but I don't think it is successful in practice. In the beginning of the game, the mini shadows did create intensity, but you quickly learn that by aiming your flashlight at them long enough, they will dissipate if it's not a real enemy. So, this is what the gameplay loop turned into for me. See shadows, aim the flashlight at them, stand there and wait. Repeat. Most of the time, this revealed there weren't any enemies, and so the time spent doing it felt wasted. It also made me realize that for about 50% of the Alan Wake gameplay, you actually are just by yourself walking around these environments. I think this mechanic of non-hostile shadows would have been better spent being used in just a few isolated encounters, such as the ballroom of the hotel where real enemies could spawn after the scene change along with the shadows, creating tension by the sheer number of potential hostiles and then disorientation by their movement. This would make them a novel experience instead of being overused. The final cherry on this is that there's not enough variation on the player toolkit end either, as Alan, you only gain access to 3 weapons as opposed to Saga's 5. These are a revolver, a double-barrel shotgun, and the flare gun. It isn't the number that's the issue here either, it's that outside of the flare gun, the others don't feel unique, and that there's a little customization to be found for how you use these weapons compared to what's on the Saga side. Having gone through combat, let's briefly touch on the game's side content. If there was one aspect of Alan Wake 2 that is worse than Control, I think the only possible contender for that category would be the side content. It's not great, marginally better on Saga's side versus Wake's, but both halves rely heavily on the notice something, get a reward format for side content. Notice a lunchbox? Get pages to use for leveling up. Notice a flicker on the surface with your flashlight? Get a new word of power. Control, for all of its flaws, had interesting side content, arguably more interesting and engaging than anything the story was doing. Extra bosses, altered items to find, weird scenarios. However, it had no meaningful rewards. Your reward was the exploration itself, or dozens and dozens of lore documents to read. Alan Wake 2's problem is that its side content isn't very interesting and also generally doesn't have meaningful rewards. I say generally because the bracelet charms you unlock have more to them than the mod system in Control, but that's a very low bar. The additional weapons are exciting and good additions, but much of your reward for completing puzzles is just ammo and healing items, which are certainly valuable in a horror game, but aren't very interesting. It also has almost none of the intrigue that Control had, and what little it does have, it squanders. There are no extra bosses, no interesting side stories, no weird encounters. Alan Wake 2 is no doubt more linear than Control, but the game already allows players to wander and explore in between story missions, so I don't see this as a problem. It also has several regions on the maps that seem like they would relate back to bigger, more interesting side content. For example, the rental cabin area in the Cauldron Lake region, and then this once flooded field slash house in the watery area. Both end up being the location of nursery rhymes, which we'll discuss in a few moments, but they also would have been good as secret boss arenas due to their size and inaccessibility until later in the game. The rental cabins actually seem like they are building towards something. You have to snake your way through the different cabins in order to access a blocked off area, but it just leads to collectibles. The once flooded region near the Coffee World Park would have been perfect for, say, a fight against a large taken moose. Alan Wake 2 instead mostly relies upon 4 types of collectibles to serve as its side content: the secret cult caches, the nursery rhymes, the Alex Casey lunchboxes, and the words of power. I've already said all I have for the lunchboxes and words. They're fine, they just don't require any effort besides noticing something. The nursery rhymes I actually liked quite a bit for both the in-game reason and lore for them, but also because they usually led to additional combat encounters. The nursery rhymes are tests being conducted in the area by the Federal Bureau of Control, requiring that you read through a children's nursery rhyme and then place specific dolls onto the correct spaces in order to match the story. These feel unique, they match the tone of the game, meaning they were often creepy, and they also offer rewards, those bracelet charms that offer small gameplay augmentations. You eventually unlock a final doll and rhyme at the Witchfinder station the FBC was using as a base of operations, but this time it's read out loud and is more involved, requiring half of the dolls to be placed in spots around the house.
While the loving mother and her hatchlings only tried to survive. When a tricky witch opened a way into the dark lake, our hero, against all caution, did a bold step take. Away from the sun which would make her blind to all that she could see.
This is all really cool, isn't it? It feels like it's building towards something bad, especially because the Bureau documents warn not to bring the final doll around the others or to the Witchfinder station. You, of course, do both of these things, solve the riddle, and then receive a call from the Bureau scientist in charge of the experiment.
Deployed is that by your unwanted actions, you may have opened the way. And now I'll get to observe what exactly occurs when a subject crosses the threshold. No, wait, that's not right.
And that's it. You get another bracelet slot and find a charm that increases your sneak damage, which, to be clear, isn't some incredibly useful charm. I don't understand why this didn't culminate in an optional boss, or some creatively designed visual segment, even a final extra combat challenge. It builds towards nothing. This really interesting idea that fits organically and perfectly into the world is just wasted. Petting the deer heads as Saga is another example of this. It fits in with the experience. I was genuinely startled when the deer head in Saga's Mind Place spoke, declaring the number of remaining heads to be petted. This kept me engaged with it, thinking it would have something cool at the end, but it was just more resources, ammo, and healing items. The cult locked supply chests are more or less the same. Most require barely a crumb of thought to solve. You'll be locating keys, solving riddles, or doing literal math problems to open them, and they almost exclusively offer extra ammo, which is useful but not exciting. There is exactly one exception I want to mention, the one that unlocks the crossbow weapon, but by and large they serve as a slightly more involved way to replenish ammo. They also have an incredibly forced explanation for existing. Ilmo Cascella, who is organizing the stashes, apparently likes puzzles, and so that's why there's math problems and riddles. It feels like the collectibles were made first and that this quirk was then grafted to the character in order to explain it, instead of making the collectibles fit the character. To be clear, I enjoyed these, they were a nice distraction, but I also don't think they were particularly worth my time, and that's the summation of Alan Wake 2's side content. Not particularly worth your time. This brings us back to the story and finishing up our discussion of it. Similar to the game's first act, you will automatically be swapped between Saga and Alan as the narrative progresses towards the ending. The slower, more thoughtful pace of the previous chapters is largely gone as it transitions to a full-on sprint to the ending, which lasts just under 2 hours. This is the game's biggest problem. It's obviously been a slow burn up to this point, but the ending just sort of happens. It feels at odds with everything that has preceded it and doesn't feel earned. It's not even really an ending. The Final Draft New Game Plus does reveal more meaningful bits to the discussion of the ending. However, because I'm me, I have problems with it as well. I'll return to all of this more fully at the end of this section. The third and final act begins with Saga performing a ritual to pull Wake from the dark place. Through her grandfather Tor, she learns that the clicker can be used with any form of art in order to change reality, and while this won't stop the horror story that Wake is writing, it allows for some wiggle room. I like this as it adds to the lore of how the clicker can be used, as well as establishing some sort of rule set that the dark place uses. This is the first we're hearing of it, but it feels like it's an established fact because of how it's written. Using art in the form of a song performed by Tor and Odin, Saga intends to change reality by specifically summoning Wake from the dark place. This leads to a long and, in my opinion, excellent combat segment as Saga must protect the Anderson brothers from the horde of Taken that their singing draws. While this technically isn't the final combat encounter of the game, it might as well be. This feels like the natural progression of the game's combat. It's intense, unlike any other encounter, and you'll be fighting many enemies at once, albeit with the help from both Alex Casey and Agent Estevez, who are assisting from the sidelines, dropping resources and using both spotlights and flares to stun enemies. The end of the song leads to Saga using the clicker and seemingly successfully summoning Wake out of the dark place, but this lasts only moments as he's blinked somewhere else. The game then shifts back to the Alan Wake side, where he enters Parliament Tower for the final time after having placed several of his wife's photos into the shoebox at his future self's behest. The apartment is empty outside of a projector which you interact with to watch his wife's final message.
He's here all the time now. There's so much rage inside of him, I can't stand it anymore. God, I tried so hard. I can't.
The video reveals two things. First, that Alice took her own life after finishing her own photographic work based on the dark place, and second, that this decision was made at least in part due to the haunting that she was experiencing from Scratch.
Alice was dead. Scratch tortured her until she couldn't stand it anymore. Until she broke. And all that time, she thought it was me.
In the cutscene that follows, we are shown Alan stepping into the writer's room to find Scratch making edits to the manuscript, and in his anger, Wake shoots him in the head. We then get the reveal that Alan is caught in a loop and that he is Scratch.
I had seen this before. This was not Scratch. This was me. Caught in a loop. I had stopped myself trying to fix the manuscript. I was the one haunting Alice. It was always me. I killed her.
It's a bit more complicated than that, and we'll unpack it more completely in a few moments, but I want to get through the next section first. We see the dark entity approach Wake from behind and appear to enter him, and yes, I know that that sentence was questionable. Alan collapses before disappearing entirely. Saga has the realization that the summoning was successful, but that it had dropped Wake on the shore from earlier, after the first overlap and fight with Nightingale. Additionally, Saga herself now realizes that Scratch is just Wake with the dark presence inside of him. This is just in time as Scratch arrives at the scene for a second boss fight against him, and it's even worse. You shoot Scratch until your allies can temporarily immobilize him with a spotlight. Also, you can turn other lights to eventually trap him. It's made even more stupid by your grandfather and Grunkle cheering you on with inspiring words as you take a lead pipe to the face. If you genuinely thought this was fun, please comment and tell me how. There's no mechanics to learn, no clever ways to play that can speed up the process, and nothing you yourself can do to the boss. Eventually, you get the lights turned just right and trap him in the FBC containment cell, but this doesn't work. The Dark Presence releases Wake but moves into Alex Casey. It takes the clicker, throws Saga into the lake, and teleports to Bright Falls where it uses the light switch. As the chapter resumes, we see Tor and Odin wading out into the lake before giving Wake vague instructions and disappearing into the dark place. Wake convinces Agent Estevez to allow him to go after Scratch, and in doing so, he finally returns to the town he vanished from 13 years prior. As he approaches, he witnesses a dark cloud engulfing Bright Falls and knows that Scratch has begun to change reality.
It had taken me 13 years to get out. Now Alice was dead. Because of me. And I was gonna make that leap again, this time knowing the cost all too well. Another way to look at it? I had brought the dark place here with me. I never had gotten out. Maybe after this I finally could. It was a fool's hope. I had no choice. I had to do it. That didn't make me any less terrified.
While it's not perfect, had I not known there were still a few more chapters, I would have assumed this was the ending. Wake is finally out of the dark place, but at the cost that Saga is now trapped within. The dark entity has escaped and he caused his wife's death. Saga is likely set on a collision course with her father, Mr. Dorr. Alex Casey has been taken by the Dark Presence, which has also used the clicker. It would be a real Empire Strikes Back type of ending, everyone left at their lowest, and while I don't like sequels that purely set up the third installment, it at least would have felt like the consequences were meaningful. Let's discuss what has happened here so far before proceeding to the end. At the end of Saga's second act, I said we get the reveal that Alan is Scratch. I also said that that explanation is only half correct, and I want to further explain that here now. When Alan realizes that he's caught in a loop and is responsible for his wife's death, he allows the Dark Presence to take a hold of him due to his grief. This is the cloud we see during that scene. So the Dark Presence hitchhikes with Wake out to the real world and doesn't make itself known until it sees that Saga Anderson has the clicker, to which it then takes control. There's actually a time prior to this though, but we don't see it in action, only the aftermath. When the cult assault the lodge, Alan is knocked unconscious and wakes to find many cultists brutally killed throughout the room. He comments that this must have been Scratch and is confused as to why he personally was left alive. We know now that the Dark Presence is using him as a host and so protects him from the cultists. This scene is recontextualized now that we have further information, and this is great. I like it a lot. What we learn is that Scratch as a separate entity that's wearing Alan's face doesn't exist. There aren't two of them. Rather, the explanation is that when the Dark Entity takes control of Wake, he can be seen as Mr. Scratch, Wake as a mask for the entity. The game reminds us monsters wear many faces. This is consistent with Alex Casey becoming the host for the Dark Presence and becoming Scratch as well. Again, I really like this because it makes some things retroactively more interesting, namely some of the Tom Zane interactions from the Dark Place. Given what we know now, we can conclude that Wake did write Return because who he thought was Scratch was actually just himself from different points in time. When Alan confronts Zane stating that Scratch wrote the manuscript, Zane not only doesn't correct him, but continues to treat the two characters, Wake and Scratch, like they are two distinct entities. This just furthers my suspicion that Zane is Wake, but as a product of the time travel fuckery. And having now mentioned the time travel, let's talk about the summoning dropping Wake at a different point in time. I don't get this. Perhaps I missed something, perhaps a new manuscript page in the final draft New Game Plus mode explains this. Perhaps I'm just not smart enough, but the game doesn't seem to explain why this happens. Saga claims that the summoning was successful, just that it dropped Wake off at a different point in time. However, she offers no explanation or evidence for this conclusion. I've looked at fan speculation on this topic, but no one seems to have the answer either, only that it could support that the Dark Place doesn't operate on the same linear timeline as the real world. This isn't new information, however, and while it would make sense, again there should be rules or explanation of why the timelines are synced up the way that they are. I've seen a few people say, we just can't comprehend it, and how that is an enjoyable answer for anyone is beyond me. I figured we'd get some sort of explanation from Wake or another character, but it never comes. Again, I want to reiterate that I'm not someone that needs every little thing explained in a game, movie, book, or television series. I think I've demonstrated those values with my comments about Ati, Zane, and the other side characters. Do I personally wish that we got more of them? Of course, but I can accept that they don't play large enough roles in this game and somewhat dismiss the need for an explanation. What I can't dismiss, however, is something so foundational to the plot as this time travel shenanigan and why it specifically occurs the way it does. This isn't just some side content, but fundamentally sets up the story the way that it is told. If Wake doesn't get sent back to that past moment, then almost none of the plot occurs. Saga would have no reason to go to Watery or the trailer, to find the clicker, or to meet her grandfather. None of it. And also, again, I am willing to admit I'm wrong here if I missed something in game, and if that's the case, please let me know. I want an answer to this, however, as it is, I don't think there is one. We left off with the pseudo-ending, Wake entering the Dark Place cloud that covers Bright Falls, and on the other side we find the reality that Scratch is attempting to write into existence, one based upon the novel that Alan wrote within the Dark Place. Despite writing the novel, Wake has no memory of its ending, so in order to make changes, he needs to acquire a copy, and upon doing so, the townsfolk become hostile. This is a really interesting idea, an eternal Deerfest in combination with a celebration for the release of Wake's final novel, but it occurs so quickly that it's hard to feel anything towards it. There's a cutscene, and then you have an 8-second chase sequence through the lodge, and then another cutscene wrapping it up. This was strange to me because it felt like there should be more to this whole segment. Alan Wake travels to the nursing home because he recognizes the circular windows of the writer's room from the picture on the back of the Return novel. You proceed through the wellness center pursued by the Dark Presence and are rescued by none other than Rose. I haven't mentioned this yet, but Rose is a returning character from the original game, although she's basically written as a different character in this game. She is a super fan of Wake's books and claims that the author has been sending her instructions on how to prepare for the Dark Presence. This is much to Alan's surprise, as he either hasn't been or at least doesn't remember sending any of these messages. This is interesting to consider because if it truly wasn't Wake sending her these messages, then I can only imagine it was one other person, Thomas Zane. We don't get anything else about it here, and I'm assuming this interaction is just here as a potential plot hook for one of the expansions. Upon reaching the attic, we get one last meeting with our favorite janitor.
Don't be spooked by it so that shit won't start beating your underpants.
Before he unlocks the door into the writer's room, Alan enters and begins attempting to map out a new ending for the novel. I want to linger on a question for a moment here. Is Alan in the real world or Dark Place at this point? It matters because it influences how the ending should be read, but also introduces some of the inconsistencies I've mentioned with the game's writing. So, is Alan in the real world or Dark Place here? The likely answer is the real world. He interacts with both Rose and Ati, even acting surprised to see Ati outside of the Dark Place.
I didn't expect to see you here, but it makes sense.
These are also clearly the same versions of the characters that Saga interacts with, not the brainwashed townspeople at the Deerfest, so that feels correct. Let's pause though, because we see Alan enter into that Dark Place threshold in Bright Falls and arrive in an altered reality that is clearly different, but we don't see him exit that threshold. This would suggest the Dark Place, or at the very least an altered real world. However, we also have the nursing home door to the writer's room. It has a spiral on it, which has been used throughout the game to represent the dark place. And not just in Alan Wake 2 either, it's also how Control represents the dark place. In Control, when you visit the Ocean View Motel, which is a nexus point for travel to different worlds and thresholds, we see a door with that same spiral, and this isn't just speculating. It's actually an important part of the Alan Wake-themed expansion for Control. Jesse sees flashes of Alan trapped in the dark place when this door is slightly ajar. This to me suggests that the doorway in the nursing home is another doorway into the dark place, hence why Ati keeps it locked, and this also explains how he can move between the two dimensions. This means Alan starts in the real world with Rose and Ati, but then steps into the dark place in order to edit the novel. Okay, remember this because we'll circle back to it. As Alan begins writing, we are shifted back to Saga for the final segment of the story. She awakens in her mind palace but quickly notices something is off, that her insecurities and doubts are being weaponized against her by the dark place, attempting to trap her within her own mind.
No. There has to be a way out. I need a way out. Oh, God. None of this is real. I've lost it. I'm not even here. The mind place isn't real. A case about supernatural darkness. I'm having a full-on psychotic break.
The chapter picks at the small imperfections that the character has experienced throughout the game and allows her to reflect on and resolve her feelings towards those subjects. She is not perfect, and a big part of this sequence is her accepting that.
I've made mistakes. I'll make more. But I can do better. And I can start by leaving this room.
I'm afraid it will hurt. But nothing will hurt more than not trying to save them.
It will hurt. But I will fight.
It's done quite well and illustrates why Saga is such a terrific character in my opinion. This scene is really given the space to breathe. It's slow and deliberately paced, so it surprised me then that what comes after it is so incredibly rushed and frantic that it almost doesn't feel like the same game. Saga awakens again, but this time in the courtyard of the New York City-shaped dark place. She receives a mysterious call at the payphone similar to Wake, although this time it's a woman's voice. It's not revealed yet, but this is Alice Wake. The voice urges Saga to find the shoebox, the one we put the photos in during the Alan section. To get to it, Saga must locate Sheriff Breaker, who gives her the manuscript page that explains how to shift between the realities within the dark place. See, because the dark place isn't just a singular location, but rather many versions of the same location.
This place, it's like trying to find your way around in a dream. I've been trying to map it, but it keeps looping, shifting. Like there were many versions stacked on top of each other.
Once at the Parliament Tower's courtyard, Saga finds the clicker and a bullet of light within the shoebox. A second call informs her that Alan needs her help in crafting the ending of the story. Saga once again enters her mind place and uses her profiling technique to begin a back-and-forth conversation with Wake about the ending. I like this specific part here in the mind place for two reasons. The first is the smaller reason. It's because we get the smaller reveal that the plot inspirations that Wake has been seeing and using throughout his chapters are actually real events that were taking place in alternate realities. This is almost a throwaway line as it is, but has huge implications and ties into where the series is likely going in the future. Second, it's because this feels like an actual conversation between these two characters. This is not a quick scene. There's a massive amount of buildup as the pair talk about the ending and the requirements necessary for its writing.
In a horror story, there are only victims and monsters.
There must be a way to bring a hero into the story.
If there is a hero, they will ultimately pay a heavy price.
I can't let the horror story take Logan and Casey. They were dragged into this. They need to survive. Non-negotiable.
Not just them. We need to try to save everyone. I have an idea how to help Casey. He's a real person who I twisted into a character. He isn't my creation, so he isn't a suitable host for the Dark Presence.
So the ending has to be earned.
set up by the story. You can't build a case without supporting evidence.
That's the only way to make it stick.
The ending will have to be dark, no matter what. The more people we save, the greater the cost. And the hero must pay the price.
One of the heroes. The scales always need to balance.
They split, with Alan focusing on writing the ending and Saga now attempting to get the clicker back to him. With the buildup, I figured there would be some sort of combat gauntlet or puzzle or final something. Saga needing to cleverly figure out a way to traverse the dark place in order to find Alan's writer's room. What actually happens is that you walk to the fountain where there's now a portal that just drops Saga into the writer's room with Alan. That's it. In the game's final cutscene, Alan and Saga are quickly confronted by Scratch, and we get to witness the ending they cooked up. The ending that matches the horror genre, yet where they manage to save everyone. The ending that is earned, having been set up by everything that came before it, and is also dark because the scales need to balance. This is that ending.
What if there's nothing waiting to be revealed? The play of shadows fooled us all, subterfuge to get our price of admission. Darkness not as a monster, but as emptiness. We're none the wiser. No answers, no truths. The hero turns to look inside, is destroyed by what he sees, and is redeemed. Saga said we're both heroes. I'll pay that price. So will she. We are here to kill the monster. I pray nothing comes after this. Nothing will sleep. This is how we win. Is it too easy?
Yes, it is too easy. The clicker is used to eject the dark presence from Casey. It then returns to Alan, who is shot in the head by the bullet of light that was introduced 20 minutes ago. The bullet of light that came from one of Alice's photographs that Alan is directed to place in the shoebox at the very end of his second act. How is this meaningfully set up or representative of everything that has come before it? The scene finishes with Casey asking if it's done and Saga attempting to call Logan to see if her death has been rewritten. After several rings, she hasn't picked up and the screen cuts to black for the credit roll. Lastly, there's a brief mid-credit scene from Alice Wake where she reveals that she is aware Alan is trapped in the dark place and that she faked her death as well as returned to the dark place herself. This was all in order to help break Alan out of his loop. Alan gasps awake, realizing that he is not stuck in a loop, but rather a spiral, and that he's making incremental progress. That's the ending. I think most of us would agree that creating a complex setup and delivering a satisfying ending to that setup takes considerable skill. Conversely, however, creating a complex setup and delivering a shitty ending takes no skill whatsoever. It doesn't matter that the setup is still complex because interesting and intriguing story ideas are less difficult to come up with than an ending that ties it all together. What matters is that there are payoffs to the setup in the conclusion. If you disagree with this, I would follow up by saying that that's fair, but also by asking you what your thoughts were on the final season of Game of Thrones. If you are like most people, myself included, you likely felt frustrated and like your time had been wasted. Like the characters and narrative ended in places that seemed inconsistent with the characters and the journey they were on. Like the rules that the show spent so many hours establishing were just disregarded, that the complexity and thoughtfulness that were the reasons you fell in love with the series in the first place had all but vanished. You might even have liked the concept of the ending, but thought that it needed a bit more time and development to get there. Alan Wake 2's ending is nowhere near as bad as Game of Thrones, but it generated similar feelings in me, that the memorable scenes I had played through largely didn't matter because it's a loop. That it was all style, no substance. Neither of the characters' arcs for the game were even completed. Saga's attempts to save her daughter were unresolved, and Alan's attempts to escape the dark place were reset. The final draft New Game Plus extends the ending into something that at least provides some meaningful narration by tying up both of those narrative threads, and we'll discuss that, but I think it's equally important for us to talk about this original ending. This is the ending that the game shipped with, and this was the only ending for 1.5 months until the New Game Plus mode was added. The final draft ending doesn't change the rushed nature of the final chapter, the bullet of light shenanigans, or how the written ending in-game still doesn't follow the rules that the pair discuss. It only changes the final outcome, not the journey. I've seen discussion from fans saying that even this isn't the true ending because there are 2 expansions planned. However, I firmly disagree with that. This is the ending for anyone that doesn't want to spend additional money. If you are forced to pay even more money to get the real true ending another year from now after the DLC's release, well, then that's shitty in my opinion. It would be like me saying that you can't criticize this video until I make one on the expansions a year from now because you don't have the complete picture of my analysis yet. New Game Plus improves the ending, but I'd also argue that it makes a few things worse. It makes even less sense in regard to some of the rules discussed. For one, Logan answers the phone call and Alan wakes back up in the same room as Saga and Casey. It seems to be a happy ending, so what were their sacrifices to balance the scale? How is this a dark ending that the genre demands? Yes, Alice is trapped in the dark place, but that's her sacrifice, not Alan's. It also doesn't occur because of the ending Alan and Saga wrote. This also circles me back to that earlier question again. Are Alan and Saga in the real world or dark place at the end of the game? With the original ending, I thought the dark place. It would fit that both heroes remain trapped as the exchange for killing the dark presence. It's also why I had assumed Logan didn't answer the phone call because they aren't in the same dimension. This would also be consistent with the portal that Saga uses to get to Alan. It transports her to his area of the dark place instead of the real world, because why would this method of leaving the dark place just magically appear now, especially since Wake has been trapped there for 13 years? Well, this is all incorrect because the new ending implies heavily that all of them are finally out of the dark place except for Alice. That portal actually gets explained in New Game Plus as well. It's a magical portal made by Ati to get Saga back to the real world. So if Ati can make an interdimensional portal to take Saga out, why doesn't he just do that for Wake, Zane, Breaker, and all the rest? It seems especially cruel that he would keep Alan there suffering for 13 years if he had the power to get him out. It appears then that New Game Plus ends with Saga, Wake, and Casey in the real world writer's room, because how could Logan answer a phone call otherwise? I'm not sure how Alan snaps back to life from getting shot in the head in the real world, but this has to be the case. The bullet of light is said to have originally released the dark presence from Alan's head, allowing it to continue to grow until it eventually returns to control him, only to get shot by the bullet of light again. This feels a bit too snake eating its tail for me, so I'm just gonna leave it. It's disappointing that the final draft wasn't used as an opportunity to further enhance all parts of the game and expand on the lore. If you've not played the final draft New Game Plus for yourself, you might assume that the ending is the only thing that changes, and you'd basically be right. There's a new opening monologue from Wake at the beginning of the game, and we get an extremely underwhelming conclusion to what happens to the Anderson brothers after the summoning ritual. Yeah, remember how they just waded straight into Cauldron fucking Lake in order to enter the dark place like a couple of big-dicked players? Well, in New Game Plus, you find them at the very end and just standing around, waiting to say goodbye to Saga. We're told they made up with Mr. Door and are now performing on his show. Let me rephrase that. They made up with their son-in-law, Saga's father, who they have bad blood with, off-screen. Why even have these two appear again if you're not going to show us the thing they do that actually matters? Outside of these additions, there are just a handful of extra collectibles sprinkled throughout the chapters, the most interesting of them involving Dr. Casper Darling from Control, who is apparently trapped in the dark place himself following the events of that game. This naturally leads me to the question of why narratively these small changes even lead to different outcomes. Almost nothing changes throughout the New Game Plus. The game proceeds in the exact same fashion with almost the entire same dialogue even. There are no different actions made. Even the manuscript pages about the characters reading about themselves having deja vu are just there to be cute, not to be important. I understand the point of the final draft mode is to be a New Game Plus mode first, but I can't help but see the lack of more substantial changes as a misstep. Especially because the "it's a spiral, not a loop" idea is an interesting way to narratively canonize a New Game Plus run where aspects of the game are changing. It's a beautiful concept that, of course, Remedy comes up with, but then they don't realize it to its full potential. Overall, I appreciate the final outcome we get here. Alan gets out of the dark place and Saga learns that her daughter is alive. These are actual narrative progression. That being said, I don't think the final chapter gets us there authentically. The game ends with Alan declaring that he is the master of many worlds now, and that's where the story ends, at least until the expansion's release. My hopes are that the DLCs touch nothing of the main narrative. Instead, that they just focus on the side characters like Sheriff Breaker or Rose, and/or offer some explanation to what is going on with the Federal Bureau of Control and why they couldn't more formally help during this whole ordeal. It's been 4 years both in-game and in our world since Control, and it worries me that their larger absence here means that the ending of that game is still being treated as unresolved in-universe. We'll just have to wait and see. So one of the reasons I enjoy making videos like these is because it means I get to spend a lot of time with a specific game. Typically hundreds of hours in some form or another when all is said and done, whether that's playing, rewatching footage, writing the script, or editing the video. Not once have I finished a video project with a lower opinion of the game than when I started, meaning I always end up with even more appreciation for the game. This is also one of the reasons I have my rule about only making videos for games that I am more positive on than negative. I can think of few things more toxic than spending hundreds of hours devoted to a project about a game I hated. I say all of this here now because I worry that I came across as extremely negative throughout this video. I want to make it very clear that I greatly enjoyed my time with Alan Wake 2. It didn't completely land for me, but I can confidently say that if Baldur's Gate wasn't based on Dungeons & Dragons, something that had a large role in my young adult life, that Alan Wake 2 would have been my favorite game I played this year. Despite the game's many flaws, it gives me complete faith that Remedy is moving in the right direction with their games, and with this connected universe as a whole. I enjoyed Alan Wake 2 more than I did Control, despite that game having a setting that I consider to be one of the very best in all of video games. Remedy understands what Marvel, DC, and so many other studios can't seem to when it comes to these connected universes, to have just a crumb of restraint. Alan Wake 2 involved the shared universe just enough to be exciting, but never to let it consume the project from within. What I'm about to say is an opinion that's not unique to me, but I think it's important to echo it here. Parts of what Remedy have done with Alan Wake 2 actually pushes the genre and medium of gaming forward. It expands on how a story can be told, and Sam Lake as well as everyone at Remedy Studios should be commended for this. Where I diverge from many others, however, is that I think they need to spend a bit more time on what is actually being said. And that's the end. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video and would like to see more videos by me in the future, please consider subscribing. 2023 has been a terrific year for the channel, and I really appreciate all of the support. I started the year with just 35 subscribers and now have just over 1,500. So again, that's a big thanks to all of you. And that's all. Take care.